practices, day-to-day routines, and we just do an honest breakdown of what it's like to go after your dreams, both big and small, in real life. My hope is that each episode of the podcast makes you laugh, think, and just feel less alone. It's also an awesome chance for me to get to share a few of my personal favorite things with you, tools, products, programs, books, etc., that I use and love in my real everyday life. And one of the ways that I do that is by partnering up with one company per season to offer you a special treat, something that I really love and that's special just for you. So this season, I've partnered with Audible, which is my go-to place for audiobooks. If you know me, you know that I'm a total book junkie, and that one of the ways I'm able to read so much is that I listen to a lot of my books while I'm doing other things, like running, walking, driving, cleaning, stuff like that. It's such a fun and easy way to read more without actually carving out the time to sit down and read more, you know? So if you're into audiobooks yourself, or if you've never tried it and want to give it a shot, Audible is definitely where you want to be. They have over 180,000 books to choose from, and the special treat I have for you is that you can actually get a free audiobook and 30-day free trial by going to audibletrial.com/realtalkradio. It's super simple, totally worth it. If you're looking for book recommendations, I can definitely hook you up there. The show notes of pretty much every episode of the podcast has great links to books. I can give you a few right now too, though. If you want something that's inspirational, more on the athletic side, check out Finding Ultra by Rich Roll. It's a great story. It was actually a big contributor in my own running journey and decision to become vegan, actually. So it's a great one for that. If you're into the bad boy romance thing, like me, that's my guilty pleasure. I love romance novels, bad boy books. Try Beautiful Disaster by Jamie McGuire. That's one of my favorites. It's especially well narrated also, so I liked it on audio even more than reading the actual book. Point is, there are a ridiculous number of books to choose from, so you'll definitely find something that you love. To grab that free book, the URL one more time for you, it's audibletrial.com/realtalkradio. Okay, so let's get to today's show, shall we? In every episode, I bring you an in-depth conversation with a new guest, and in today's episode, you will get to meet Ash Amberger. She is the founder and CEO of the Middle Finger Project, a place for people who want to learn online business but can't stand newsletters, cheesy advice, tired cliches, words like empowerment, or anything else that makes you roll your eyes and want to quit everything. Her writing workshops and courses help people who want to be creative, have fun, and learn to love doing business without feeling like a snake oil salesman. Personally, I'm in love with her bold, ballsy style, and I can't wait for you to get to know her too. In this episode, we talk both business and personal life, and Ash shares her #1 tip for writing copy that engages your audience. She shares the struggles of assimilating when you move abroad. She's living in Costa Rica right now. She tells the story of how her first business tanked and what she did from there to build what's now a mega successful, super popular business. We talk about the struggles of learning to grow beyond what you believe is your fixed identity. Super interesting. We also talk about other things like jealousy, how to do self-care in a real way instead of just thinking of it as a hippie buzzword. She tells a little bit about the memoir she's currently working on, plus her goal of helping entrepreneurs and creatives who want to continue to break through the noise with their business and their creative work. All in all, it's a conversation about stepping into yourself, taking risks, and the rewards of being bold and ballsy. So all of that starts in just a minute, and as always, you'll be able to find all of the links and resources that we mentioned in this episode over in the show notes at NicoleAntoinette.com/podcast. Awesome, we're good. Ash, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nicole.
I'm so excited that despite our obstacles and needing to reschedule that this is happening right now.
I know, there's always a need to reschedule. I think it's something called life. It's weird.
I know, right? I think this is the only one that I've had to reschedule. Like, I've been pretty lucky and been pretty good, but I emailed you like an hour before when I was like basically on my way to go get x-rays on my back for this terrible injury, and you were the best and most supportive, and I was like, I felt so bad. Like, I hate canceling on people or having to reschedule or whatever, but yeah, I couldn't walk or sit or stand or do anything, and I was like the most terrified. So
I mean, what kind of a jerk would I be if I held you to that podcast? Like, you can't walk, you're basically going to the ER, and I'm like, well, Nicole, I really can't do it any other time. No.
Yeah, that's fair. No, dude, it was so crazy. this was, I mean, at the time of this recording now, like almost a week ago, right, that this happened. And it was just like this random fluke, like did like a normal run, like felt fine, was just doing like normal body weight strength stuff, like nothing new, nothing too heavy. And just like one of those things, like in the middle of the workout, it basically sounded like someone was like standing behind me, like cracking all their knuckles at the same time. Like it felt like something cracked or like snapped. And it was just this like unbelievable, like shooting pain. I was in like our little home gym in the garage, and I literally couldn't move. I mean, luckily I don't live alone. Luckily my husband also works from home. It took me like 8 minutes to crawl the like 5 feet like to the door, open the door into the living room, and I was like, something happened, just like sobbing, couldn't move, couldn't do anything. He like gets me into the back seat of the car. The only thing I could do was lay on my side. And so I get in the car, like basically he like drives me to this urgent care. It was just like this whole like unbelievable, they wouldn't let me lay on the floor at the urgent care. It was just like a horrible thing, whatever. Anyway, so x-rays were clear. They think it's like a muscle strain or a torn ligament, potentially a nerve or a disc thing. I should know more this week. I'm going to go to physical therapy, but it's slowly getting better. I was like, oh, well, I guess if I'm ever going to cancel a podcast, this is like a real good reason to have to reschedule.
This is the time. Yeah, well, I mean, I hope it's not me. I hope I'm not the bad luck charm, because we haven't really had a phone conversation in years since we started Rangasm so long ago. And then the day we were scheduled to start one, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying.
Yeah, I know. Well, to be honest, it was funny. I was thinking about it afterwards. Obviously, I'm not glad that it happened, but I was like, at least, not that anyone wouldn't be understanding, of course, but I was like, at least we're friends, right? Like, if it was like someone that I had like completely cold pitched, never talked to before, they'd be like, who is this girl that's like so not reliable or whatever? But I was like, okay, hopefully Ash knows that like this is like not my jam. I don't like to cancel things. And
it's like Oprah. You're like, listen, I'm so sorry.
Listen, sorry, Oprah. I hope your Skype connection's working real good, but I can't jump on this podcast with you. Sidebar, yeah, Oprah, if you want to be on my podcast.
Your podcast is awesome, and I am delighted to be here. Seriously, I think you're the most organized, professional, really put together in every facet of her life human being that I know. I think that's a true statement, Nicole.
Well, I guess I fooled you good if you think that, but no, I appreciate that. So, okay, I mean, there's so much stuff that we could talk about, but I feel like let's just like talk about some real shit. Like, we don't have to do any like nonsense or fluff. Like, let's just have like some real conversations. So, the first thing I want to hear about, one of my favorite things that you talk about or on your website is this philosophy of being unfuckwithable, which is like my favorite word, right?
Right.
Talk about that. Where did that come from? What does that mean to be unfuckwithable?
Oh, I love this word too, unfuckwithable. And you know, I'm still really on the fence about using the asterisk when I write that, because I feel like it makes it look cute, but at the same time I'm like, wait a minute, is this less unfuckwithable using this little asterisk here? Yeah, you know, I think that the Middle Finger Project, which is my website, it's evolved so much over the years. It started out as lifestyle commentary. It blossomed into, let's talk about how we can build businesses and use the internet to do that, which is great because it's followed along the path of my own life in the way that I have built things. So obviously, when I'm talking and I'm blogging, I'm talking to people, I'm talking about my own experiences in general. So the blog has followed me so much over the course of the years. And over the last couple of months, I think that I really hit the nail on what the Middle Finger Project is holistically. And it's that word, it's unfuckwithable. And it's doing things both in life and in business in a way that you are proud of, in a way that really stands up for what you believe in, no holds barred, putting yourself out there, and not taking any shit. Too often we take so much shit from the world, from our family, from our friends, from clients, for example, because we're too scared. And so the philosophy has developed into becoming unfuckwithable, if we can say it. It's about bravery, but it's a modern bravery. Yeah?
Yeah, I love that. How do you feel like right now you are living that or trying to live that? Like, what does that look like for you?
Ooh, you know, Funny you ask that, because I've done a lot of, I hate this term, saying it anyway, I've done a lot of soul searching over the last year or so. And in the past, it was almost easier to live an unfuckwithable life. It was as simple as getting on a plane and going exploring different countries and figuring out a way to connect to Wi-Fi and running a business, and that was just so amazing. It was so cool. And then, of course, over time, you do this thing where you mature and you start to nest, and you have, blenders and stuff that you actually purchase and keep in one spot, and you have a house maybe, and your business evolves with you, which has happened in the case of my own. So it's forced me to redefine many times what it looks like to be unfuckwithable in a modern society that maybe you're not hopping from plane to plane to plane anymore. And the biggest thing that I think has defined me with this term is learning how to give myself what I actually want in little ways. And not so much in the big ways like before, but little ways. Feeling okay and comfortable with logging out of my email even though there's still people hanging there. Feeling comfortable with working 8 hours and then stopping. It's that thing where it's like, oh gosh, well, there's so much more to do, and I can really do it. I mean, what kind of an irresponsible a-hole would get on the TV and watch The Good Wife when I still have all of this work to do? But it's about learning how to be good to myself in a way that's going to help me be so much better overall in the world. And I think that's really what it's all about. Unfuckwithable in little ways as opposed to big ones.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree with what you said too. That's this is a conversation that I had actually with our mutual friend Jamie, who's on this season of the podcast too. We were talking about that it was almost easier to do big kind of risky, ballsy things or whatever when we were younger, or when there's less that you feel like you have to lose, or that shift is happening when, like you said, okay, so you have a blender, you want to keep it in this one spot, you're not willing to uproot your life at every turn, and when you're not willing to do that, then how does that shift what it means to do bold things?
I have come a long way with business in particular, and self-care has never been something that I've been good at. In fact, I've been total shit. I mean, my weight has fluctuated 40 or 50 pounds over the last few years, up and down, and it's always so evident when I'm taking care of myself and when I'm not. My weight loves to show me myself in the mirror. I've seen myself pass through moments of extreme stress, followed by moments where I'm feeling okay, and then extreme stress again. And at the end of the day, it's been a process of just learning how to be kind. And I guess the word love comes in here, because a lot of times in the past, I remember laying in bed at night with, the anxieties that you get when there are so many big things happening, and you don't know what's going to happen, and you can just spin and spin and spin. And I'm really mean to myself in the middle of the night. I'm really mean to myself. And what I had to start learning was I would just start saying the word love over and over again. Love. And reminding myself, it's okay, just love being in bed, love sleep. You don't have to be on top of everything right now. It's been a hard thing to learn. It's really weird how hard that is to learn.
Well, yeah, I think it's also we can put a lot of self-judgments around that kind of stuff too, right? That I think even when you're talking about self-care, that's become such this buzzword thing, and self-care and self-love and all that stuff's thrown around so much that I think it's easy to roll your eyes at it, but to also miss the the process of needing to define for yourself, like, what that actually looks like. And, like, it's not necessarily the same, like, person to person. Like, there's plenty of people out there that'll say, like, you have to take care of yourself by, like, drinking this green juice. Like, all right, but, like, that's not what self-care looks like for everyone. And being able to, like, step out of the, I don't know, kind of, like, cultural hippie buzzwordness of it and actual be like, okay, I have to take care of myself. Like, what does that look like for me? Like, what do I actually need? And, like, am I willing to give that to myself?
Yes. Do you know what's really funny is that I have learned over the past couple of months recently, I've been trying to get okay with reading gossip magazines on my Kindle because I'm so judgy of myself and I'm like, oh, I mean, like, really, what kind of a person actually reads that garbage? And here's me. I used to love reading that garbage, not for what the content, but because it was a real legitimate time out and it connected me to the outside world. I love fashion. I love dressing up. I love that stuff. And it's something that I put on the back burner because it felt so irresponsible for so many years. Like, this is not a part of the end goal, so I must therefore put on the blinders and forget, you know, Us Weekly. But, you know, I think that's what I'm coming back to. Self-care is allowing myself to do things for the simple sake of pleasure and not being goddamn judgy.
Oh my God, I'm so into this right now. I mean, I didn't let myself read fiction for, like, years for the same reasons, right? Like, if I need to be reading something that's, like, personal development or, like, related to business or, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, why don't, it's so funny, like, to just let yourself do things that feel good, right? Like, the way you feel about those magazines, that's how I feel about, like, reading erotica and, like, bad boy romance novels. And, like, who cares, dude? Okay, so other than reading those magazines, like, what are some things that, like, legitimately, judgment or not, like, make you feel good?
Oh gosh, okay, I'm so much better at this now. For a really long time, I have now been living, I would say, most of the year in Costa Rica, which has been difficult for me because I don't necessarily identify with the beachy culture or anything like that. And I went through a phase where I was just totally resentful and like, man, like, I'm just gonna sit inside. I'm not going out to the beach. I'm not doing all of that beachy stuff. I'm just gonna sit here and work on my business because obviously I'm better than all those potheads who are walking around on the ocean. And obviously that's not a healthy way to live at all. So one of the ways that's been big for me is just learning to go down to the beach and disconnect the association between, okay, so if I'm on the beach, then this automatically makes me one of those beachy, irresponsible people with, you know, hemp necklaces, and just going to the beach and taking a walk for the sake of walking, for the sake of enjoying the ocean. And also, if I want to take a walk, not beating myself up about the fact that it's not a jog or a run. And guess what? There's value in taking the walk, not even for exercise sake, but for sanity's sake. Awesome. Let myself do that and root myself on about it instead of beating myself up about taking a walk. Isn't that funny?
No, I mean, I can relate to this so much. I think a lot of people can. I mean, it's something that I'm working on is like which, like, even saying this, like, makes me feel crazy because I'm like, I should be able to do this already, but that's just more judgment. Like, I feel like I'm trying to allow, like, pleasure without justification, right? Like, it's not like, oh, well, yes, it's worth going outside, like, because I'm running, right? Like you said, like, it can just be a walk. Like, there doesn't have to be, I'm doing this because, like, you don't need it because, like, I'm doing this. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, just, like, allowing ourselves to be, like, complex people. Like, I love what you said about, okay, well, I don't want to be this, like, hemp wearing, you know, pot smoking, not working, whatever, but just because you're also enjoying the beach doesn't, like, you're a complex person. You can enjoy the beach and also be, like, really badass at your business. Like, we set ourselves into these, like, really tight boxes, I think.
Yes. Oh my God, I love that. I love the not needing a because. That's really hot. That's good.
I mean, easier said than done for sure, but, like, it's something that comes up for me a lot, like, when I feel like I need to justify this. I mean, this has been, like, a thing that's come up a lot just since, like, working for myself or all of that. This, like, it's funny how a lot of the reasons I feel like people start working for themselves is for, like, time flexibility, right? Like, that's what we say, like, oh, I can work from anywhere, like, I can set my own hours or do whatever. And yet, if it's, like, a Tuesday at 2 p.m. and I'm not working, I feel really guilty. And, like, it's been, like, a couple of years of trying to be like, you chose this for this reason. Like, if you, like, want to be, like, sitting on the couch, like, watching Empire at 2 p.m., like, you can do that. You can do that thing. And
yes, I saw some really cute thing on the internet the other day that said entrepreneurs are the only people who give up working 40 hours in order to work 80. Like, yeah.
Definitely. I mean, and again, like I think it's awesome to be like super passionate about what you're doing, and if that means like some days you're like, I'm real stoked on this and I'm gonna work for 10 hours or whatever hours, like that's fine. But it's like not letting, like the way I think about this a lot when I think back about being in college, and I've always been kind of the like last minute, not like literal last minute night before the paper's due, but like maybe 3 nights before the paper's due, like that's when I'm gonna write the paper. That's always how I've been. That's always when I'm gonna write the paper. And I spent the first like 2 years being in college feeling really guilty. Like it's, 4 weeks out, well, you should be working on the paper. So not only am I not working on the paper, but I'm also not enjoying the time that I'm not working on the paper. So I just basically felt like shit for 4 weeks and then wrote it and did fine like I always did. And it wasn't until my last year in school where I was like, okay, you have 2 choices. You can either be working on the paper for real, or you can be guilt-free, not working on the paper, going out and enjoying yourself. And I was like, this revolutionary concept that like I don't have to like feel, I don't have to like justify not doing the work but it's fine because I feel guilty about it. So like,
I totally agree. I've had the same thing happen. And my fiance is Costa Rican, which is the only reason I am still here. But it's always funny because of the language barrier. They have a different, of course, an entire different set of idioms and phrases that they use. So one day he looked at me when I was beating myself up about something, and he looked at me and said, "So, you still sharpening that axe, huh?" And I'm like, "What? How does that translate? What are you talking about?" And he just made this motion of picturing like me taking an axe and just hammering it down on my shoulder, on my back. And he's like, you realize that's what you do to yourself all the time, right? Like, it's like if you had an axe in your hand, you would absolutely be using it to axe yourself in the back. Like, stop. I'm like, wow, it's such good imagery.
Yeah, brutal and good. Also, we clearly haven't talked in a while because I didn't know that you were engaged.
Yeah, man, I barely even know I'm engaged. I can't, it's been a year. It's been a year since I figured I had this ring on my finger, and I'm like, what is that thing?
Was I just like blacked out on the internet that I did not know that this happened? Congratulations.
No, I haven't really talked about it much because I'm still in shock, I think. It's one of those things that doesn't really align with my vision of myself. So I've done a lot of work trying to digest what this means for me, because I'm super happy to be engaged, but at the same time I'm like, wait, engaged doesn't really go with my name. It doesn't make sense.
Ooh, okay, so this is like real good and juicy stuff. That what you just said about that it doesn't go with your image of yourself. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I have so much trouble with the wedding thing. Everyone and their mother, literally, this is maybe the only time I can use that phrase, and it really is true. Everyone and their mother always is asking, so did you guys pick a date? Are you gonna get dressed? And I'm just like, oh my fucking God, that sounds like a nightmare to me. I want nothing to do with that because I have never identified with being girly, with being someone who would want a big wedding with the white dress. I feel like if I wore a white dress, like it would just be the most hypocritical, weird thing I've ever done in my life. Like I have a blog called The Middle Finger Project. And so it's been strange because, you get like a mother-in-law asking you when you're going to get married and if she can get involved, and you don't really know how to tell her that it's just really not your thing.
Yeah. I mean, this is why we eloped. Like, I'm the same as you. Like, we got married in the woods. Like, bye.
No kidding.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with weddings and that kind of stuff, I feel like this is another really good example of, like, you got to do what, like, actual feels true for you. Because some people are super excited about, like, having a big wedding and doing all, like, that's awesome, right? But, like, that's not me. Like, I was really excited to be married, if that makes sense, but not necessarily for the wedding part. And I wanted to celebrate it, but I don't enjoy being the center of attention. Like, I had seen like multiple friends like in stress tears over their wedding for like so long, and I was just like, you know what, that's worth it. Like, that stress or whatever is worth it if you actually want the end result. But I was like, my truth is that I don't want that. And so Paul didn't either, which was amazing that we had that in line. And we were like, okay, we're gonna elope, and our rule for ourselves was anything that feels stressful for more than 15 minutes is out. And so it was just like very easy. I got a dress dress from the sales section of VictoriaSecret.com for like, I think it was like $20, maybe $30. Like,
awesome.
Got married in the woods. Like, the thing that was important to us was having it well documented. So like, spent some good money on like photographer, videographer, whatever. That's it. Got married, eloped, bye-bye. So yeah, I don't know. You can do whatever you want.
That's amazing. Yeah, you know, I think there's so many changes happening as we are growing into ourselves, and the wedding thing happens right at that prime time where everyone's growing into themselves. And me too. I've seen so many of my friends throw these really extravagant, amazing events, and they've been wonderful. But every time I go to one, I've never been able to picture myself getting excited about doing any of that.
Yeah, so I was the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, well, trusting your own sense of self, I think, has been really important, despite the people who are going to look at you like you're crazy, and despite the people who are going to have something to say about it. Now, learning that this is really your life, like yours, hey, this is yours. You get to do it. You! Is cool. I don't think it's always that easy, but I think it's cool. And it's the same thing, like trying to learn how to walk on the beach without completely feeling like I should have a nose ring and some kind of a tattoo of a dolphin on my bicep. Like, you know, I'm working through it.
Yeah, I mean, this like obviously expands to so much more than just like the wedding stuff, right? This idea of like trusting that like what you feel is true for you is like worth not fighting for, because I don't think it has to be this like aggressive battle situation, but that like people are always going to have like their opinions and their advice, and like I think a lot of it is really well-meaning, but it like we all see the world through our own eyes, right? So someone who's like wants you to maybe have like X, Y, or Z style wedding or do whatever, like that comes from like what they want for themselves or what they think would make you happier, right? Like, but that doesn't have to necessarily be what you use to make your decision.
Yeah, you know, I think I'm in an interesting and unique position with regards to identity, specifically because of living abroad and having to assimilate into a different culture that doesn't necessarily share any aspects of a big part of my identity. So, I mean, for example, I've struggled a lot over the years with, I just mentioned fashion and clothes. That's not really a thing here. So I've significantly lost that part of myself, not voluntarily. Driving a car. I don't have a car here. I would love to have a car here, but to import a car is an 80% tax. So if you just want a basic like Toyota, you might end up paying $60,000 for a Toyota, which just seems silly. So driving, I miss that part of my identity, being someone who's independent and being able to go places when you want without having to rely on other people or a taxi. That's also been something different. Adjusting to cultural differences, of course, and even the size of our house. You know, my fiance and I like kind of cute bicker all the time because I'm like, look, I'm gonna build an awesome space for us. It's gonna be super cool. And he's just like, why can't we just live in this house or this other house? And I'm like, babe, if you want me to live here, I need to kind of keep like a little part of my identity. And one of those little parts, silly enough, is having an American style kitchen. You know? So because of all of those pieces of my identity have been put on the back burner, I've had to look for it in other ways that I don't know that I would have had to do if everything were just normal. And so some of the ways that I see myself coming out, it's like almost like as if you were to put me in a pressure cooker and I would start to just like pop out of it in little places. It's really, you know, through my writing, I find I'm much more creative here. Through little acts of kindness, I'm a little bit better about connecting with people because there are certain things that happen all the time, like, oh, the power goes out and it's out for the entire day. And what are you going to do? You just have to just chill. So I'm better at connecting with people here because I don't rely on Facebook. Seeing myself come out in different ways under that pressure has been interesting. And I don't know that anyone else can really duplicate that where you are, but you know, who you are really is who you are. I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of this so much. I mean, selfishly, I feel like this is like such a cool thing for me to learn more about you, things that I didn't We just happen to be doing it in public. This is great. So tell me the story of how you wound up in Costa Rica to begin with.
Yeah, I had been here when I was younger, when I was still in college. Gosh, I graduated college 10 years ago now, so this would have been about 12 years ago. And I majored in Spanish as one of my majors because I thought it was the sexiest thing on earth. I'm like, why wouldn't anybody major in this? This is awesome. And I did, because I was a kid who had no idea what she wanted to do with herself. And one of the things that I needed to do at some point was travel abroad, get the fluency going. Came to Costa Rica for a semester because I figured that, well, if I'm going to go anywhere, I might as well go somewhere where there's nice weather. And ever since, I had always just been coming back for a visit here and there on my way through. I lived in Chile and South America for quite some time, and sometimes I would pass through Costa Rica on my way, just say hi to a couple of friends, take a couple days on the beach, even though I just got done saying how much I hate the beach. It's different vacationing on it than it is living on one. And one of those times I was passing through, I ran into this guy that I used to know. It's a small town, so everyone knows everyone. You kind of bump into people and you automatically know them through osmosis. If you've said hi at least twice, then you just know them. And that was the case here. We ran into each other at a girlfriend's birthday at a restaurant. And he ended up hanging out with us that night, and we could not stop talking. We talked all night long. Turns out he grew up in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, 30 minutes west of where I'm from. His mom had married an American. They lived there when they were young. He speaks perfect English. And I could never leave ever since. I just love the shit out of this kid.
How long ago was that?
That was almost 4 years ago now.
Wow, and here you are. I love it.
Yeah, I was actually on my way back to Chile at the time, and I did leave. I left and went back to Chile, and I was there for 4 months, and he and I started talking on FaceTime every single night, and that is when I fell in love with him. That's when I came back to Costa Rica, even though I had no plans on living here, coming here, staying here permanently.
Well, and it's fun, right? Like, you have no idea where you're going to wind up. I mean, not as dramatic, but like, I'm in Bend now that I'd never even heard of Bend. Like, literally did not even know that it existed. When I called my mom to tell her we were moving here, she was like, "What? You're moving where? What's Bend? What?" Like, so you never know, like, where you're going to end up, right? And I love that.
Yeah. Well, even,
go ahead.
I mean, it's, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's even, I mean, it's just so weird how life works. I mean, growing up, I hated fish. I don't eat fish. I despise fish. My dad was a huge fisherman. He would insist on taking me out into the middle of the river with these humongous waders, and I would just be rolling my eyes. He would take me to all these fishing conventions, all sorts of stuff. Then, I guess, I don't know, when I started my copywriting business, I laughed because a company called Winston Rod, which is like the number 2 rod in the world for fly fishing, they contacted me about doing the copy for their company. And I'm like, wow, that's funny. And then I meet Carlos, is his name, and he has a sport fishing charter company in Costa Rica, which is why we're here. And so I think the fish just really like me. They you know, you never know where you're going to end up, but here I am, like, part owner of a sport fishing company. It makes no sense at all.
Oh my God, I love it. So you mentioned copywriting business. I feel like I heard you say somewhere along the way, I don't know, sometime in the past, that the first writing business, or like the first thing you tried to do, tanked, failed. Was that true? Like something about...
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear about that.
So bad. Yeah, that was... Jeez Louise, you know you're getting old when you can't even come to hear that anymore. It was a while ago, and I had quit my business in marketing to start my own copywriting business for 2 reasons. The first was that I saw planes going overhead outside of my office, and I was like, oh my God, those people are going somewhere cool. In contrast, I'm sitting here in this desk, and I don't know how I can do this for the next 60 years. That was reason number 1. Reason number 2 was I had spearheaded so many marketing campaigns for this company. We were doing really well. I had actually been offered a stake in the company, which was awesome. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel that my existence was really relying on making another company a lot of money. It occurred to me that since I seem to be the linchpin in this deal, I could probably do the same thing for myself and have a lot more fun while being able to hop on planes. I started my first copywriting business very haphazardly. I quit my job. My boss loved me and he was heartbroken. I was heartbroken. It was this weird time. It was like a breakup. I was like, I must go. And I did, and I started Ashley Amberger Copywriting, which is so fucking original. And I started having clients that were in line with the types of clients we had previously had. So lots of pharma companies, medical device companies, some tech companies, media companies. Bottom line was, as soon as I started getting clients, I realized that the work itself was miserable. This was horrible. I no longer had a water cooler. I no longer had friends to share my misery. Here I was just writing really long, boring, in-depth case studies about the new technology of screw they're going to put in your ankle. And so I started hating it. And when you hate something, you know, you don't really put forth your best effort. And I found myself in this like deep, ugly depression, sitting there in my apartment. I was young. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I hate this. And I had to have a boyfriend pay my rent that month. It was a mess. And finally I was like, okay, this isn't for me. And I left. I got another job in advertising and I moved on with my career for a period of time until I started to get the same angsty feeling once again.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to hear people's kind of like origin stories, like for their business or whatever. So how did, like from that point, like how did that lead to your current business? Like what happened next?
Well, at that point, what had happened was between that time, that earlier time frame, and starting my current business, I had gone to grad school. So I graduated with a master's degree in linguistics. That was something I did entirely, also haphazardly and irresponsibly, in the sense of, hey, I just know I like this topic. You know, I had this background in Spanish. I had a BA in public relations, and I really liked words. So I went to get a master's degree in linguistics without having any idea what I wanted to do with it. I started teaching at some of the universities in Philadelphia. I taught at Penn State, Branch, St. Joe's University, Drexel University as an instructor in the English language. And I didn't erase the feeling. I thought that doing something other than advertising sales that I loved would be the thing that finally made me come alive again. You know, all the cliche stuff. And it wasn't doing it for me. Wasn't it, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was until I started writing the Middle Finger Project blog. I started the blog in 2009, and I just started talking about a lot of the ways I was feeling and this weird, creepy desire that we all kind of had creep up on us at one point or another. It's like, this isn't enough. What is enough? And I started talking about it, and that's when I started creating, you know, the little audience that I had at the time. And when I discovered that there are other people out there like that, it inspired me. And I had learned a little bit more about starting my own business by then. I was scared to death to just try to start another copywriting business based on my previous experience. But I had a lot of people writing me about it, right? So I was writing this blog, and a lot of people were writing me these messages being like, hey, like, can I pay you to write something for me? And I was like, well, I mean, I guess I could take your money. Yeah. So it was born accidentally. It really was. And then I started realizing how beautiful being in a business, doing things you love doing, was as compared to something that you just did because that's what you were supposed to do.
Do you remember the first thing that you sold or created?
Mm-hmm. I do. I remember, deliberately, outside from random requests like that, the first thing I sold was a service. It was just a consulting service where I was helping people with their blogs, looking around at their blogs and saying, okay, well, look, I managed to do this all myself. Here's how I did it. Here's how I found an audience. Here are the things that I think worked. Here are the things that didn't. And just applying that to their own situation. And then I was quickly growing. It was weird. I was quickly growing, and I realized that one-on-one consulting was a really nice stepping stone, but I needed to take this business seriously, and I needed to get real about it if I really wanted to do something. So that's when I started forming House of Moxie, which is actually the real umbrella company name, and doing things the right way, building out a real team and real services, and taking it from there.
Yeah, I mean, your kind of evolution too is so interesting to me because, like you said, like you started, this is just my blog, right? And then I think it's easy though for people to say, oh, well, she was just lucky, or that just like worked for her. But knowing you and like having followed your story for a while, like I know that there were a lot of intentional choices for you. Like this wasn't just like accidental success, right? And like I think sometimes we can brush things off. I'm sure there's like an element of like luck and timing and everything, but I'm curious now, like for you looking back, what you feel are some of the most impactful things, like big or small, that you did that led to, like, let's say, current success?
Yes, you know what? I've been thinking so much about this because actually, if I'm being honest, I forgot. I sold something prior to selling that service, and that was a book. I sold a book that I hadn't written yet, an ebook that I had planned to write. And I decided to get the gumption to ask people to pre-order this book if they thought that they would enjoy it. I did, and I ended up earning a significant amount of revenue at the time, which was awesome for me. I mean, I think it was maybe like $5,000, something like that, maybe a little less. That was awesome because I all of a sudden realized the power of the internet. Wow. I don't need to go door to door. I don't need to send out these postcards to people like I had traditionally done in my marketing job. I write this blog, and there are people right here with me online, and I can talk to them in their inbox and ask them if they want something. They respond positively, and they buy it, and it helps us have this really awesome relationship where I can provide things they need, and in turn, they provide me with money. Wow, mind-blowing. So, to answer your question, what I've realized and grappled with over the years is that as I have grown, it has become decidedly harder for me to take risks, to just put it out there and see, to just throw up a landing page, to just go with it. Oh yeah, I'll figure out the content later kind of a thing. It has been so much harder because as you grow a brand and you grow a name and you grow as a company, now you've got the weight of being that brand and that person and that company, and there are more expectations that come with that, including professional design and really well thought out sales copy and pricing that isn't completely arbitrary, all sorts of stuff that now it's other kind of responsibility. So over the years, it's become much more difficult for me because of that pressure. Whereas in the beginning, the reason for my success, I think, was because I wasn't scared. I didn't have to live up to anything. I was really just still creating it. So I was really comfortable with experimentation, throwing it out there, seeing how people responded. I wasn't nervous to get a slew of negative emails. Whereas now, I do think about those things, sometimes more than I should, and I hate that. So now it's a bad thing for me. In the beginning, though, it was a really crucial part of my success.
Yeah, so how do you grapple with that now? Like how are you able to still keep like what it is that made you successful without, you know what I mean? Like, but like keep that within like the context of this like now like larger brand.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have been really careful to monitor and be mindful of is, let's say, okay, so we've got all these awesome platforms now, Skillshare, Creative Live, anyone who's got a really sexy studio who can create beautiful videos where they can give a class via amazing video. That's something that in the past hasn't been easy for me as someone who creates classes and gives fun workshops and does things like that. It hasn't been easy for me to go in that direction for a number of reasons, but most of it, I'm living within a series of constraints here. Constraints that not only are real constraints in terms of where I live and what's realistic, but also constraints in terms of, well, do I really want to be doing video? Do I really want to go in that direction? And so I've had to be mindful about thinking, okay, well, there's all this pressure to ante up in that respect. All this pressure to, oh, wow, I have to be on top of everything. I have to be the best at everything because that's living up to this brand that I built. The solution for me has been to extrapolate the real reason why people love me. The real reason why the people that do love me love doing business with me and love taking my classes as opposed to something at Skillshare, for example. And the real reason has nothing to do with the video, but it's really about the style and my signature, the way that I present information, how we have fun with it. Anyone who's read my blog and my brand knows that it's all about the experience, having a really fun, enjoyable reading experience. So I've tried to translate that into any of my classes and workshops that I'm giving and really putting a focus on that as a selling point and taking the pressure off of myself to be everything and amazing. I'm not going to be like, I'm not like a target, right? I can't like put together an entire marketing team to do something, but I can take the one thing that nobody else has and I can sell that. So that is the way that I've come to grapple, I think, with that increasing pressure as you see all of these different platforms and what's that damn one with the video? Periscope.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I just learned what Periscope was this season. My friend Jeff Sanders was on the show and he had just started using it and I was like, dude, you gotta explain this to me. I don't even know what. I'm like, am I so old? I'm like not an early adopter at all. So
I know. And now they've got Peach coming out and all these different things that I just don't have any desire to incorporate because I think that it's important. It's really important to recognize your limitations. And look, if you're one person, it's impossible to be everywhere. So how can you maximize your impact? And for me, it's been getting, I hate to say clear, but getting really clear on the thing that I bring to the table. That
I think that's super important.
Say again?
I think that's super important. I mean, that's like something that really sticks out to me for what you said, like identifying, like being really, really clear on what your like secret ingredient thing is, right? Because like what's the thing, because there's other people that teach the subject that you teach, right? Or offer services that you offer, and that's gonna be true for every single person. Like no one is the 100% like unique unicorn snowflake flower. So being a, right? Like, so knowing like people come to me because of like this specific thing and like holding that front and center with like new things that you create.
Yeah, and I didn't know that intuitively either. I did do, some surveying. I've listened. I've put emails into folders and really anything that's giving me feedback on why someone, quote unquote, loves me for a certain reason. And at the end of the day, there are two things. The first is the fun, edgy voice. The approachable, edgy voice, as my literary agent says. And number two is people seem to get balls by association. And that's been fun. I didn't really realize that was such a big part of my brand, but it really is. It doesn't matter what the hell I'm talking about. I might be talking about how to install a sprinkler in your yard, but for some reason, people seem to really be able to relate to the content that I write because it makes them feel braver. It makes them feel more balls, which is where Unfuckwithable really started to be born.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. I'm like having a lot of little personal realizations right now that I'm like, ooh, like what are the things that like people love? Why do they love me? Or what? So clearly, I'm gonna take this into my own life. But you mentioned your literary agent, and I want to talk about this book that you are writing, have written. Where are you in this book process?
I mean, it's like dream come true, right? Here's me, like 13-year-old me hanging out in Barnes and Noble, just like thumbing over all of the Babysitters Club books or, whatever at the time. I just really, I can't really see why anyone else would pick any other career path, because for me, having your book in Barnes and Noble is like the ultimate thing. So I was approached by a literary agent several years ago. This is a very awesomely well-known literary agent, and I almost shit my pants because I wasn't prepared. I had no book proposal. I had nothing. And it was just because of this little blog of mine. And she was like, so, when are we going to talk about this book that you need to be writing? And literally, I mean, this was a moment come true. And so I dropped everything. I ran to try to think of a book, number one, and write a book proposal and do something now, because all I could think of was now is the time and I can't lose this opportunity. And, jump at the chance. Just do it, Ash. Just do it. And I did it. And she was like, so I think we should go back to the drawing board about some things here. And I was like, all right, listen, here's what I think we should do. Let's drop this concept, because if I'm being honest, this isn't the book I want to write anyway. I don't really want to write a business book at this point. I want to write a story. So give me some time and let me develop a story. And then let's talk. So literally, I mean, almost 2 years passed, and I've been writing a manuscript. It's full-out memoir, which if anyone is into this topic, they know that number one, memoir is super eye-rolly. I roll my eyes at myself. Number two, it's really difficult to get published the first time by a big publishing house if you've never had anything else published, because memoir is just totally self-absorbed, right? And that's the story I wanted to write, goddammit. And I wanted to make a hybrid of really fun, entertaining narrative with real practical business advice and the things that work for me, and tell it in a story form. So I reached back out to her this past fall. I pitched her the story, and this time she was shitting her pants, which is awesome. It's like, oh my god. So next thing you know, here we are, we're working on it. We're pitching to some publishing houses right now, but we're trying to keep things low profile until I finish a little bit more of some of the manuscript and some of the proposal. It's awesome. It's a dream come true.
It's so exciting. I mean, selfishly, I love memoirs. It's like one of my favorite genres of books to read. So I'm like very stoked to eventually read your book. But I love what you said about like I think it's so easy to, especially when you get unexpected opportunities, to feel this kind of like now or never type of situation. Like, oh my god, I absolutely have to do this like right this second. Otherwise, like this opportunity is going to go away and not come back. But like the fact that you were like, no, we're going to wait on this, right? Like 2 years later, and now this is the book that you like feel like you're supposed to be writing. Like I find that to be very inspiring.
I was nervous. I was really nervous. I thought that maybe I was being foolish, and maybe by then she would have forgotten about me. Maybe I would have lost the opportunity entirely. I was scared. I actually hesitated for a really long time on reaching back out to her to pitch her, because I needed it to be perfect. I knew I had already screwed up the first time. And this needed to be perfect, because if I screwed up twice, I didn't think I was going to get another shot. The thing that pushed me over the edge to reach out to her was an email that I got from Ciccone out of the blue. It was a very kind email where he picked in the drop down of my contact form, I want to give you a testimonial, and he simply said, something to the effect of, you're an original voice, keep doing what you're doing, something like that. He and I exchanged some correspondence, and when I talked to him about the book, his response back to me was, go, comma, go, comma, go. Go, go, go. And for some reason, as soon as I saw those words come across the screen, I don't know if it was like Seth Godin's magic power words, or there was just something in the simplicity of them that was really powerful. So powerful that I was like, I want to get this tattooed on myself, and I don't even have any tattoos. I went, and that day I reached out to the literary agency, and I pitched her, and she was like, yes.
Yeah, there's something that can be so empowering and can be the spark that we need when, like, it's like those same words said from someone else probably wouldn't have had the same impact, right? But like because of it's Seth Godin and right, like whatever it is that you think of him and his writing and his whatever, that like that it's funny how like something means something different coming from different people.
It is. I'm not gonna lie, it was incredible validation. And I think there's value in that. Sometimes, we read all these articles about how, you don't need everyone's external validation and just do you. But really, we are social creatures, we're humans, and I think that it is a beautiful thing. And it helped me incredibly to gain enough confidence to push the send button on the damn email that I had queued up forever, months.
Have there been any other either kind of big influencers or mentors, whether you've had communication with them or not, or people that you've really kind of looked up to along the way of building your business?
I'm the worst at this question. I feel like I don't know what the right word is here, because I feel like there's not anyone I can quickly identify and say, yes, this person has been totally inspirational to me. But when I get most jacked up and feel my most creative and my most capable tends to be when I'm reading other writers that are using humor and fun and personality in their writing. I mean, you're one of those people, Nicole. In fact, I've used you as an example in my writing workshops many times over the years. And you would be a great example of someone that I draw energy from reading your words, reading other people who have a great writing voice, because for that same reason, it's that validation. It gives you that strength to say the things in the way that you want to say them. When sometimes, maybe you got a couple of trolly emails recently. Those things kill me. I can't process them well. I do really bad with that kind of negativity, and it affects my creativity. So I wouldn't say necessarily there's one person, but I do think that seeing other people be creative reminds me that it's okay for me too.
I love that. Also, thank you. That's very flattering. I feel literally right back at you the same way. For me, the thing that when you say feel really jacked up, fired up, I agree on the humor thing for sure. The thing for me that really hits is people who are telling the truth of their own kind of lives and stories, but in a way, this might sound weird, in a way that's not kind of I don't want to say oversharing, because I think that could be categorized as a lot of different things, but where it's not just word vomit, this thing, but people who are owning their stories and kind of able to share a personal story that has a universal lesson, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I love obviously sharing truth for the sake of sharing truth, but it almost makes me uncomfortable when it's super word vomity or feeling vomity, but that, and that's something that I think you do really well too. And obviously there are others, people that are sharing their story with a purpose, and that's when I feel ooh yeah, I want to do that thing.
Yeah, I read the blog Scary Mommy sometimes, even though I am not a mother, I have no children, I can't relate to really anything that they're talking about, but it's the way that they present the topic, and like you said, draw oftentimes a universal lesson about what it is to be human that's so compelling.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that my kind of favorite icebreaker question to ask people is, what are you totally obsessed with right now? Because I'm very attracted to other people's obsessions. Even if, right, let's say it was fly fishing or landscape painting or things that I personally could not care less about. I'm really attracted to other people's fire about their thing, and I like hearing other people talk about that. So it's kind of a similar thing, if they're sharing their story in a way that's really engaging. I like when people just kind of tell the truth and are the most themselves, even if it's about something that's super guilty pleasurous or something that I wouldn't really care about. That there's, I think, we don't realize how much power when we are ourselves out loud, that really does give other people permission to do the same, or at least that's how I feel seeing other people do that. I'm okay, it's okay for me to love Twilight and do whatever and talk about this kind of stuff, right? Because here's this person over here who's whatever, oh my god, gossip magazines, or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I recently, actually over Christmas, I decided to somehow sit down and watch the first Harry Potter movie, and then the entire holiday I watched every single Harry Potter movie that was ever made, and I'm wow, here's a great example of something that never would have lined up with my identity before, but I'm just rolling with it.
Yeah, well, I think some of it has to do with giving ourselves the freedom to grow and change, like this identity piece. Like it's so, I've struggled a lot with getting like really locked into like a certain view of myself, and then when either by kind of necessity or just like circumstance that has changed, like that was like the hardest thing for me with quitting drinking. Wasn't quitting drinking, it was the identity shift that came with that. Like that's who I was. That was like a very part of my like public brand, or quote brand, whatever.
Yes.
And it was also like when we were talking about guilt-free pleasure, that was like literally the only way that I knew how to have fun. So I was like, not only this is no longer my brand, but I'm like, I don't even know how to spend my time. Like it was just like the identity piece was like much harder than like the behavioral piece of just not drinking. And like that was like a really interesting thing to, like when we change, like I think this is something that's not talked about enough, is like that there's like an identity shift and like a kind of almost like a grieving process for like either your old self or stepping into this new thing. It's like a very complicated process.
I agree. And there was a period in time where, especially when I was adjusting to the transition of living in Costa Rica, where I found myself reaching for the wine probably a little too much. And I went through a time where I realized that it was almost a crutch, a way to, number one, a signal to stop working, and maybe the only signal I had, because my business was growing so fast at the same time that all of this was happening. And number two, it really felt like a carryover from the United States, from this one thing. People in Costa Rica don't drink wine typically because it's a very tropical culture, they're like beer drinkers or whatever, and it was like something I was latching on to as like, this is me and I don't care what you're saying about it because this is me. And yeah, it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to give up those crutches, and it's not even just wine, it's anything, it's so many different things. I don't even know how you successfully like just breezed right through that. Like it was no big deal at all. You did an amazing job with that. And I think that actually, speaking about personal brands, that's why I love reading your blog, because not only do you mix the humor, but if I'm ever self-doubting about something and whether or not I can or cannot do something, I love reading your blog because it reminds me that even some of the most hard things we have to do, you can.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you, like, it was not easy, right? Like, I did it, but I think things are not, I don't want to say harder than people let on, right? But like, I think that's an assumption that we make about other people's lives and experiences that can actually like get in our own way. Like when I find times where I'm feeling like really jealous of someone, or like looking at either their like business or their book or their writing or, whatever it is, oh, well, it's so easy for this person and it's not easy for me. So therefore something's wrong with me and I'm a failure, and like all of that kind of self-talk. It's been like very helpful to be like, okay, how, like, to almost flip it around, like how might someone see like my journey or my story? And even though I try to be open about like the fact that things are hard, I think it would be easy to say, well, like, oh, she just quit drinking, right? And so I'm like, okay, the fact that people could look at me and not know the whole truth means that I don't know their whole truth. Like, it's not so easy for everyone else. Like, I'm fine. Right? There's like an element of like needing to not think there's something wrong with me because whatever it is that I'm working on is not easy,
Oh yeah. I see other websites sometimes and I'm just like, that is designed so amazingly, and why don't I have a designer that did that? And like, obviously, like I start blaming myself for things. It's funny, we do that. We really do.
What are the types of people or businesses, or whether it's like personal or business related, that you feel like that you're most likely to feel jealous of? Like you just made the design example, but what are the situations that tend to like trigger you into feeling jealous?
Oh man, the book thing has been huge for so long, since it's been the number one thing on my entire life list to have. And it's now having a book, I think, is really the biggest form of validation, self-validation. I don't know if that's why I've always wanted it so bad or not, but seeing other people publish books sometimes makes you think, well, why am I not writing fast enough? Or, wow, that was a brilliant introduction, mine's not that great, and all those things. I've definitely had the jealousies, like I just said, over really sexy design. You need to get on that. actually gone ahead and downsized my entire team, and now I'm restarting from scratch. So that's something I want to be really good about this year in particular, sexy design. Sometimes this is unrelated to competitors, but sometimes I get jealous of regular people. This girl came down to Costa Rica recently. She was actually a friend of a friend who was here visiting. And she works managing a restaurant in Washington, D.C. And I listened to her talk, and it's so interesting how you can become jealous of the same things that you were once, like, loathing. And I find myself sometimes jealous of people who just have simple jobs that require just simply routine effort, and not so much like the next greatest thing, or like the most creative sales page ever, or all of this brain power and all of these emotions that go into writing, for example, and all the thinking and the thoughts. And it's a really mentally and emotionally taxing career. Sometimes I'm really jealous of people that are just plain happy with where they're at. They go to work and then they come back and then the rest of the night is theirs. I'm really jealous of that sometimes.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, like with Paul, right? So, like, he works for Twitter, which he loves, like, works remotely, like, just, like, absolutely loves it. But has, like, work hours, like you said, like, that he's, like, super in it and doing it, and then, like, it's 5 p.m., and he's not, and, like, he shuts off his work computer, and that doesn't get turned on again until Monday, or whatever, and, like, he and I have had a lot of conversations about, I think I got brainwashed by the internet into thinking that everyone wants to quit their jobs and work for themselves, and that, like, anyone who says they don't are, like, not being honest, or they're just afraid, or, like, it was really interesting, like, how deeply embedded that stuff, like, is within me. And it took, like, we probably had the same conversation, like, 16 to 20 times, where he was like, I don't want that. Like, he takes on freelance projects sometimes, like, if they sound really fun for him. He was like, I could absolutely work for myself. He's like, I would be fucking miserable. Like, he's like, I don't want to have to deal with, and then he listed out all the things that come with, he's like, I just want to, like, write good code and, like, do my job, right? And, like, it was so, like, he had to tell me the same thing, like, over and over and over again for me to, like, actually get it, like, oh, this is what he wants. And, like, that it's, yeah, sometimes I get jealous of that too, that I'm like, I wish that there was, like, a thing like that I, like, was so happy doing and then could just, like, shut off. And yeah, so I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a kid in high school and college, I worked for 8 years at an ice cream stand, right? I mean, I was, like, managerial at the ice cream stand back then, and I loved going to that job. I would show up so happy, my regulars would come. It wasn't something I had to think about too much, right? You just scoop the ice cream, but there was beauty in that. There's beauty in that simplicity, and it was something that I never wanted for myself. I always thought, oh, I was so much better than that. I was, like, going to be an intellectual and all these things. And cool, of course, I built an amazing career, but at some times there's really this need to, you have to build in these moments of non-pressure, or you will kill yourself. And I think that oftentimes is what I crave, what a lot of people crave, and why I find myself, like, longingly thinking back to my ice cream shop days. Like, no, I wouldn't really want to work at the ice cream stand anymore, but at the same time, I want to take from that what I did like and try to replicate parts of that in my new life, right?
Definitely. Well, yeah, being able to take what you like and replicate it. But I also think, like what I'm hearing come out of that story specifically is, like, coming to terms with, like, the way that we self-judge a situation, right? When you were saying, I thought I was better than that, right? And like, but now coming full circle to being like, okay, well, that's not a thing, right? Like you can be happy doing lots of different things, and it's not like one career choice is better than another. It's being able to be like, what do I really enjoy? And like you said, being able to pull from that. Like I worked at Williams-Sonoma for years, like teaching cooking classes and kind of sales associate stuff and doing food demos, and like back when I had this whole other like food related kind of career path. And I loved, like, you go in, you like put on the apron, and like then at the end of the day I like take off the apron and I'm done. And like I thought about this again through a conversation with a friend about a year ago, that like just that act of like having like even a simple uniform, it was almost like a trigger that like work is happening, work is not happening. And I was like, okay, I need some more separation currently between working Nicole and not working Nicole. Like whether that is like, this is the outfit that I wear to work, or this is the, like those like small triggers, even if you're just like working in your own house, right? Like that I realized that was something that I need, was like some kind of external, this is work time, this is not work time, which like might sound silly, but like I like miss the apron, you know?
No, absolutely. I've been considering getting an office just for that reason. I think it would be so awesome to leave an office, even if, you know, if it's a self-imposed boundary, I'm all about it. I think it's so important, especially, you know, we're all adapting. It's not like online businesses and all of this online technology existed all these years ago. It's something that we are pioneering, and we have to figure out how to use the best way we can, not only the most efficient way we can, but the best way we can. And I think there's a difference there. The best way for us might be in moderation with limited restrictions around it. And I think there's a lot of truth there that we will probably keep examining and will probably become more and more relevant over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I'm interested to something that you said before about that you recently kind of like downsized your whole team. What was that decision process like, or why did you do that?
I hated being a manager. I missed writing. I realized I went from being the writer to wanting to take on more clients and build a business around writing, which, you know, was great because I worked with some amazing people and some amazing writers. But then I was managing the writing, and it took all the fun part out of it because I don't want to be a manager of writers. I want to be a writer. So I had to recognize, I don't think the bigger is better. And if it's something that you want to do, I think it's important to remember what you loved about your business in the first place and make sure you stay in it. It was hard. It was hard, but now it's just back to me, and now I'm going forward in 2016, figuring out, you know, who I need to support me and in what ways, and be more mindful. Maybe I don't need more writers, but maybe I need other kinds of support people that will let me do the writing and they can do all the other stuff.
Yeah, I like that about like bigger isn't necessarily better, right? That it's like the ideal thing isn't like growth, hire all these people, and maybe for some people it is, but like if that's not your jam, like you don't have to do that. You can be and are like incredibly successful like without that, you know?
Yeah, well, there's a really tricky line to walk, particularly when you have a personal brand and then you try to grow a team, because the two don't always jive when the expectations are set up that you are the personal brand and you are the, you know, the person. I think it can be done if you are really deliberate about it. It's like somebody like Oprah, again, she's a super duper personal brand, and yet if we had anyone advising us from Oprah, we'd be so happy with it. But at this level, it's a little different, where if I'm the personal brand, you hire me to, I don't know, write your website copy, and then I pass it off onto a different writer. There's a conflict. It's just, it's a mismatch of expectations. And that was really where I had to reassess, because I understand the value in becoming more and more scalable and really up-leveling in business. But I don't know that it's necessarily by using my personal brand. I think I can do that in other ways. So I'm playing with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I like the experimentation of it too, and the willingness to be like, okay, I grew to this point, that doesn't feel so good, let's try this. Like that, it's so easy to think we have to get locked into like whatever past decisions we've made, but there are very few decisions that can't be reversed, maybe with some consequences, but that it's like that's possible to do. And I love hearing like stories of people doing that.
Yeah, you know, you do feel a little bit like a flit, you know, like I'm flitting from thing to thing sometimes. You do think that. But overall, in retrospect, I can say that it was probably one of the more courageous decisions that I made, and I'm feeling so good about it. I'm feeling so good about being more in control of my own business and my own brand than I had felt when I had a team, where I was consistently trying to involve them to make them feel like they were seen and they were heard, because that's the kind of leader that I am. But at the same time, it made me feel less powerful with my own brand and my own business, because now I felt like I owed all of these things to these other people that really were just simply not as invested as I was. So it's different, you know. Maybe it's not for me running a big agency. Maybe I can just run a little one,
right?
And run my little ice cream shop on the side.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that so much. So, is there anything like new that's kind of on deck for you this year, or like secret dreams for the business, things you'd love to try, things like that?
Yeah, lots of things. Obviously the book is number one priority. That takes up all of my morning. I find I'm most creative at 5 o'clock in the morning. Literally, I will wake up, I will grab my coffee, and I will start writing a book for at least 3 hours. That's priority number one. Priority number two, I'm really excited about doing things more in person. This is not the best business decision from a scalability perspective, but it's the best business decision from a human perspective. And I had done some experimental life hooky retreats the last couple of years with people in person. I want to do more of those because I enjoy travel, and I think there's so much value in the actual connection between people. I like that. I like getting offline. I'm excited about that. I want to do some Europe stuff this year. I've got some things in the works. I am looking forward to upping the ante in the writing department more on my website. I've got a really cool insider column coming out. If you can imagine, for example, the New York Times has its regular subscription. Then it also has a really neat insider subscription where they show you the story behind the story of, wow, so this reporter went all the way to Afghanistan, and here's them reporting on their experience when they were telling the story when they were getting the interview. I love this. And so I have recreated something similar for my own business, where it's going to be an insider's view on a lot of the stuff we're talking about now, but really with hard numbers, with strategies and plans. I'm excited about that because I want a place to be able to really get real with people, and not just be blowing smoke up anyone's ass. So those are the big three.
I love that. I feel similarly about in-person stuff. Like, I've started to think about how much more like I want to do and create like tangible things and like in-person experiences. And I mean, I'm in like definitely a transitional kind of like pivot point after having taken a couple months of sabbatical last year and basically wrapped up like almost every single thing that I was doing with my business because I didn't want to do it anymore. And now it's like pivoting into, okay, that weird space when you know that the things that you were doing before are not your like 100% true yes, but you don't know yet what's going to fill that space, right? Which is like very much a lot of uncertainty and like an uncomfortable place to be. And it's great because I get to focus a lot on the podcast, which is like right now my like current favorite thing. But I've been thinking too about really wanting to do more in-person stuff because I think as great as the internet is, and it does offer us a lot of different types of connections and, you know, things that are not geographically bound, that there is like an inherent thing that I am feeling just like missing from my own life, right? Just like loneliness and that kind of connection, especially when it comes to like creativity or doing hard things, like being able to have like real relationships to support that. I think you can't replace that with anything else.
I agree. You know, I've often been jealous of co-working companies because I think it would be so cool to be able to go to a co-working space and have that same almost human interaction while still working on your own independent projects. I've been considering developing an online co-working application, so to speak. But that's so far down the road. But for that same reason, you know, it can get really lonely when you're running a business by yourself, and not all of your friends in real life understand that either. So it's kind of weird. Like, we can get together with our childhood friends from 8th grade, but to meet somewhere where we understand each other's challenges, that was something that I never really realized was such a big deal until I got older too. I thought we often had friends by default, friends just by physical location, or parents' friends, whatever. And as you get older, you tend to want to be more selective with the people you spend your time with because you want to feel heard, you want to feel understood, and you want to create that connection. But it's hard when you have online businesses and things because no one understands what the hell you're talking about.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think those relationships with people who are doing like similar things is super important. Like my friend Julia, she has this podcast called Running on Ohm, and I'm like a reoccurring monthly guest over on her show this year, which is like so wonderful. But just having a friend that's also has a podcast, right? Just like that wants to talk about like little nitty gritty things, like that alone is like super impactful. And I think about this a lot in terms of like collaboration after having spent like 4 years like having a business partner, working with Jamie, doing all of that. Like it's not even that I miss the work that we were doing, I miss like having someone else in it with me. And so part of what I think about in terms of going next is I think I want to do more collaborative projects. Like I co-taught a weekend-long workshop with my good friend Bryce this time last year-ish, like January 2015, called Change Camp, that was all about kind of like actual real talk around like goal setting and making stuff happen. And not only like were the women that came wonderful, it was so fun to have like a co-teacher and doing things. So I'm starting to look into, okay, who are the people that I really want to collaborate with, and like what could that look like? Because I think for me there's like a level of fulfillment that comes too from like not needing to shoulder all of the responsibility and like having a partner in things.
Yeah, I agree. I've enjoyed some really great partnerships over the years. I've also enjoyed some really unhealthy partnerships over the years. I think it's important. I think it's valuable. As long as you pick the right partner.
Yeah, pick the right partner, and I think draw some good lines around stuff too, right? Like it was really fun that we were partners for something that lasted 2 days, right? Like that it was like very clear expectations of what was involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what else do I want to talk about business? Okay, so in terms of, you mentioned like some of the things you're working on this year, but what do you feel are the topics or kind of like questions that you're the most interested in like learning more about? teaching people? Like, what are the topics that you feel like if you're going to be on your soapbox that like right now that you feel like the most energized by?
Well, I've been soapboxing quite a bit about this idea of self-care, which is why it came up in this podcast. I think that as we learn, we share, and that's something that I've been doing for sure. I see so many people following the herd, getting on board and doing things kind of on autopilot, like, oh, I have to do a webinar now. Webinars can be awesome. They can be really awesome, but I see a lot of people pressuring themselves to do things that they don't want to do, but simply think they have to do. And I really dislike this echo chamber that you find online of you see like the same 10 people getting, scratching each other's backs all the time. So you start to really live within this world that is not really representative at all of the real world, and it's not good. So I want to encourage people to continue to follow their own desires, instincts, their own wants, their own likes, things that they actually want to do. I see a lot of people offering services, for example, one-on-one services, whatever kind, because they feel like that's the standard, so they should do it too. I'm really passionate about encouraging people to really build their own business. Don't build someone else's business just because you think that that's the way it should be done and that person had success in that way. I'm really also excited about unpacking what the real secret ingredients are to writing that makes people excited. And I think that as we continue down this path of internet and businesses online, writing is the one thing you can't get away from. It doesn't matter if you're a writer or not. It's the one thing that's there. You have to have writing on your website, on your social media, on your products, descriptions, whatever the case may be. And so often I see people struggle with not knowing what to write, not knowing what to say. And, there are formulas they can follow to a certain extent, but what I'm really interested in is figuring out a way to continually break through the noise. That's really what I do all the time with my own work, with TMF, figuring out a way that we can all continue to keep it fresh and keep our messages feeling exciting and novel. And it's all about presentation. But that's the interesting part for me, is figuring out same idea, same concept, same product. Why does one perform so much better than the other? And the answer is people are attracted to a certain presentation more than they are the other. That's a nerd alert, because that's weird that gets me excited, but it really does.
No, I mean, that totally makes sense. I remember one of the things that I've heard you talk about before is the idea that you hate when people use the word newsletter, and this idea that download my free ebook, your whole thing that nobody wants your quote free goodies or whatever it is. I've heard you talk about that kind of stuff before, and it always makes me really happy, to the point where I honestly, okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot. If right now, on the spot, you had to dish out your kind of couple of core fundamental no BS crash course in how to do business or copywriting or whatever better, what are obviously this can't be comprehensive, but what are the couple of things that come to mind that you're these principles?
Yeah, the first one, I think this is my favorite one, I love teaching this in particular, is about getting tangible, specific details. So for example, a lot of times when we're writing anything, we tend to write from the big picture, we tend to summarize, we tend to write sentences that are designed to encapsulate an entire idea in a sentence. So I might say, don't you hate when your kids get out of control and they start crying and you just don't know what to do? That's a sentence that is likely to appear on, let's say, a mommy blog or on an about page. That's a very average sentence. One of the really awesome keys to engaging writing that gets people excited is to drill down and go into the details. And you know this intuitively because this is something that you do, Nicole, but a lot of people don't. know this intuitively. Instead of saying, oh, don't you hate when your kids get out of control and they're crying and you don't know what to do, you might say, don't you hate when your 5-year-old with the sticky fudge, pinky shoves it in her ear, wiggles it around, and then smushes it all over your brand new $1,000 Pottery Barn ottoman. Random example off the top of my head, but that's the difference between writing from a very general bird's eye perspective and summarizing, and getting so specific that the details tell the story and they make it an engaging read. People are very nervous to use the details because they're always like, yeah, but I mean, that didn't really happen to me, or the odds of that happening to somebody else's kid are just so little that they aren't going to be able to relate. But it's actually the opposite. When you read those kinds of fun details, they're very visceral and they get people excited. That's my favorite thing ever to talk about, details.
I mean, that like so much relates to what we were talking about before, that like both of us are drawn to writing that's like shares very like true personal stories, examples, whatever, and that like the universal meaning is like inherent in that. It's like I think sometimes we get stuck in the like false belief that we have to like spoon feed the meaning to people, and like exactly what you said, that's how you wind up talking in kind of like the vague nouns of like, like love or making a difference, or like I can't tell you how many about pages, right, that it's like I help such and such like in terms of life purpose or make a difference, and like that it comes from a really good place, but like what does that actually mean? Like I would so much rather a really specific example, even if I can't personally relate to that example, it still like is more, and like you said, it's more engaging. And like I think that's true in business copy and just like in writing in general, that we're like afraid that the details of our stuff are going to be off-putting when it's actually the opposite.
Exactly. I mean, like we were talking about before with the wine thing, I would much better relate to a life coach, for example, that instead of saying you're going to help me, get empowerment, if you would sit there and say in my face, like, look, I know what you're doing right now. You're drinking the second half of that bottle of Cab Sauv, and you're feeling pretty good now, but tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you wake up, you're going to feel like shit because you're losing control, blah, 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 whatever. That makes me feel like you're the one person in this world that actually gets me, as opposed to empowerment. Who even knows what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would think the second thing that I would add there is kind of building off of what you just said a second ago too, with this tangible, universal lesson. This is easier said than done, but a lot of people don't know what to blog about, for example, because they feel like their own personal stories are just that, they're personal stories, and they don't feel like it's not relatable in any way to their business. But one of the keys of successful blogging that successful bloggers have proven time and time again is that they can talk about anything as long as they are very diligent about looping back around and teasing out what is the universal message here. What does this say about us as humans, about us as business people, about the state of the industry, whatever the case may be, to make it feel relevant. And that's the beauty of its personal story married with big lessons. And a lot of people forget that part. Easier said than done, but important as well.
I also think, something that I struggle with sometimes if I'm like feeling insecure or like dowdy about writing or storytelling or something like that, is like I put a lot of pressure on myself to like, okay, well this has to be so meaningful or so inspirational or whatever, and I forget that people take what they need to take from something, and that like there doesn't always have to be a very clear like ribbon tied around it, here's like the universal truth or message or whatever, like that I have to remind myself sometimes that like that a lot of the power comes from just like saying what's true for you, and people are going to take whatever from that. Like someone says what's true for them, and that sparks this thing in someone, it sparks something totally different in someone else. Like I've seen that in terms of like getting validation of what I just said. Like I'm so surprised by the emails. Like I send out, my like weekly Friday emails. They're like notes, kind of like a blog post or whatever by email. And it's so interesting to me to see the range of responses that like the same piece of writing will get, right? That like, these 5 people, it made them think, oh, this thing, or like reassurance that like they can do hard things or whatever. And then for this other person, it makes them share a story from their childhood or this, like, and it's really, I love that. Like I love kind of that feedback and conversation, but it's also such a good reminder that like you have no idea like what your thing is going to spark with someone else. So like for me, I always try to start with like, okay, like, is this true? Like, does this need to be said? Like, does this need to be said by me? Right. And like just sticking in like that and accepting that I can't control how someone's going to take it.
Yeah. I really like that because that's it. It's true. It's conversely this idea of making sure that whatever you're writing about is real, and going deep with it, I think, is something we're all scared to do, but something that we need to do. So even if we're not outwardly, concluding it, I like what you just said there about with the tie up with a big ribbon. If we're able to be real with people and share the real experience, like you said, I think that comes naturally, and I think it comes as a byproduct, as opposed to giving a very surface level overview and hoping that people will somehow read into it enough to think about it, enough to match it with their own circumstances. But yeah, when you're real with people and you're real about your experience, it's just hits them over the head. That is awesome. Sure.
Yeah, I love it. So let's see. I think that's a good way to wrap up what we were talking about. The way that I like to end these episodes is with what we call community questions. So they're questions that Real Talk Radio listeners have shared, submitted, asked to hear more about from different guests. So it's just kind of like a fun, rapid-fiery, like 7 or 8 questions, if that feels like a fun way to end. Some of the ones so we had like 8 questions picked like for this season that people submitted, but some of them, like guilty pleasure stuff, we have already talked about in the conversation. So I am going to sub that one out with one of my favorite questions. Do you know Alexandra Franzen? She's a friend of mine.
I love Alex.
Yeah, she's the best, right? So yeah, she was a guest in season 1, and one of her questions that she has shared before that I love, that I'm gonna kind of pinch from her or poach from her and ask you, is, it's kind of a fill in the blank. If I really knew you, I'd know ... So if someone really knew you, what would they know?
They would know that I don't actually swear and use foul language as much in my real life as I do in my writing life, which is surprising to some people when they meet me for the first time.
Interesting. So was that a deliberate choice for you to use that in your writing?
No. I think it goes back to what I said before about my real creativity and my real unfiltered self comes through a lot more when I'm writing, and I feel like there's a certain level of privacy versus when you have to put on some kind of a public display with people. I'm certainly not immune to feeling the pressures of having to, look professional or seem a certain way. So I think the writing version of me is really the more authentic version.
Yeah, I feel that way about myself too. Sometimes I don't even know what's true for me until I've written about it. And I'm like, oh, that's how I feel. Right, got it. Yeah. Oh man, okay, that's a good one. Okay, so the second question, who would you say right now are your 2 or so favorite people to follow on social media?
Laura Jane Williams. I think she's brilliant. I love that she's British, and she's one of the people that I've seen really come out of the shadows this past year as someone who's got a hell of a voice on her. She's a blast to follow. She's at superlativelyrude.com. She is probably my number 1. Number 2. Oh hell, Nicole.
You don't have to have a number 2. That's fine. If that, Laura's great too. Yeah, she was in season 1 of the podcast too. She's someone I like a lot as well, and so I
just think she's the bee's knees. I like people
I echo that.
Yeah, she feels really. She feels like I want to be her girlfriend.
Well, and that's one of my favorite reasons to ask this question, is because it's such an insight into whoever your first answer or so is. It's that's true for you. Like you just said, like maybe you like following her because you would like want her to be, you know, your girlfriend, versus someone else wants to follow someone because it like makes them feel a certain way about themselves. But that's, I don't know, it's like another way to look at social media. Like, who do we actually enjoy following? Like, I think we give social media a really hard time, but it can also be like super funsies.
It's true. I'll think about a second one on the way.
Okay. So third question, if you could go back and change one thing from your past, what would it be, or would you even change anything?
I think that if I could change anything, I would try very hard. I don't know if I would be successful, but I would try very hard to really stop rationalizing. I rationalize for a lot of people, on a lot of people's behalf. In terms of employees, in terms of business partners, in terms of blog readers, in terms of people in my real life. I rationalize for their behavior a lot. And I'm very forgiving and I'm very understanding, because I would want someone to extend the same courtesy to me if I were going through a particularly difficult time. However, I have also come to the interesting conclusion, especially over the last 2 years, that sometimes, what's that phrase? When people are who they show you they are? That's not it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
When people show you who they are, believe them, something like that? Yeah.
Yes, that's it. You know, I really don't like being cynical, and I think that that's also goes back to the identity thing. I'm not a cynical person, and I don't enjoy viewing myself as someone who would be suspicious or, you know, anything like that. But I do think that as we grow older, the world is not always as sweet and well-meaning at times as we wish. And I know this is kind of a negative Nancy, but I do wish that I had listened to myself and stopped rationalizing so much for other people when they were doing things that I thought were shitty.
Yeah, that's an interesting, cool answer. I'm just going to let that be. It's great. The next question is, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that you're facing right now? It could be personal, professional, whatever. And what's one thing you're doing to work on it?
Well, I am tasked with building a big business this year for many reasons. But I've got to generate probably at least an additional $1 million in revenue this year, if not more. And I am ready for that. I'm okay with that. But I think the challenge really lies in doing it in a way that is in line with what I talked about before, about liking my work and not just employing a team to make a little factory. That would be too easy. The challenge is really how to up-level in a way that is me and feels good. And I'm on it. I have some plans.
No, I mean, if anyone, I like, sounds like really, I think, lame to say, but I like super believe in you. I like always think it's so like crazy in a good way to like watch the things that you create come up with and take off. And like I've seen you like set benchmarks for yourself, and then you're like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna reach that benchmark, right? So yeah, benchmark it. Yeah, I love that. Which 2 or 3 books of any genre at all would you say have had the biggest impact on you, or maybe that you reread the most?
I have so many books in my Kindle library right now, and I kind of wish I had it on me for reference, because I'm like, So let me tell you a little story. When you become a business owner and you have 1,000 things on your mind and you're stressed out, your brain just stops working. It's the funniest thing. Oh my God! I have so many, and I've enjoyed so many recently, and now I can't think of a goddamn single one. Can I cheat?
Yes.
Okay, let me cheat. Give me like 15 seconds to cheat.
Is cheating mean looking at your Kindle?
No. You see, I did have my Kindle here. I just need to grab it. I'm cheating.
No, it's not cheating. I like it. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say.
Okay, well, besides all of my Us magazines here. Ooh, well, I can tell you that one of the from a writing standpoint, one of the best books that I read last year and then I have reread and highlighted and used as a real resource for the entire time I've been writing my manuscript is a book called Story Engineering by Larry Brooks. It talks about how to actually craft a beautiful narrative arc, and if you were to make your story into a movie. So that's valuable from a commercial standpoint, and since that's in line with my goals, that's something that's been really great for me.
I'm definitely going to have to check that out. That sounds interesting to me as well.
Yeah, I really liked Amanda Palmer's The Art of Asking. It's kind of new. I think Amanda's brand is similar to mine in many ways.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Her TED Talk is so good.
Yeah, I like her, and we share a literary agent. So I was excited when I saw her book come out because I feel like that's very promising and awesome. Let me give you one more that I'm super jazzed about. Oh, well, there's the book Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Had the Time, which obviously is really in line with this podcast.
I haven't read that book. See, you're giving me good suggestions. This is all, this entire podcasting thing, it's like so selfish. I'm like, all right, give me books to read, tell me things that I need to know. It's fantastic. It's also, obviously you and I know each other outside of just this podcast, but it's such a good way to make people be your friend. Like, please be on my podcast. Subtext, I love you. I'm your fangirl. Can we be friends?
I love it.
See, my secret motivations of having a podcast is like, be my friend, please. Oh, God.
Totally love it. There was actually another one that that was the first book that came to my mind, but I can't remember the title of it. But it's a 99U book.
Oh, yeah, I love the 99U stuff. Okay, which one?
That's the thing. I'm looking at one that's in my Kindle that's not the one. But it's also about time management, and I found that to be a really awesome read. I enjoyed reading that very much.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I'm going to link to all these in the show notes, so that's fine. I'll find it and put it up.
Fabulous.
Okay, a couple more questions for you. When you are feeling stuck in a rut, what's one thing that you know you can do to get yourself out of it?
Oh. Well, a lot of times, right, like getting real in a real world setting, I can't just, shut my laptop up and run off into the meadow for the afternoon, because that's not always the most practical. But sometimes what I do to get myself out of a funk is sit down and remember, I actively have to remember the cool things that I should be super happy about. And then, God, that sounds like meditation or something annoying, but I do that from time to time. Sometimes you just wake up in a pissy mood and you realize you have 1,000 deadlines and different things going on, and you just feel like the world is crunching in on you. I literally just stop and think, okay, let's think about all the awesome stuff. Let's think about the fact that I woke up this morning and, yeah, you know what? I'm a little overweight right now, but guess what? My organs are still there. They're still working. I don't have cancer. Awesome. I'm here. I'm alive. Have to remind myself of those things. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But overall, if I can remember, and you know what? And I have that Us magazine to read later. It's going to be a good day after all.
Yeah, that's your version of a gratitude practice, right? And these are the kind of things that I feel like, they're so simple sounding or they're so cheesy, but there's a reason that they everyone says that they work, right? As long as you find your individual version of that instead of just copying and pasting someone else's process or whatever. Not that that's not a good place to start, but when you can individualize these types of practices for yourself, yeah, they're simple, but that's the thing. We think that the answer has to be this crazy complicated thing, and it does not.
It's true. I have to give myself a little talking to, and also, of course, music. I love to put on Spotify. Sometimes I forget that when you're just sitting there writing in your own head, you need a little bit of boom boom, and it's awesome. It's good.
I also forget that, like, sometimes it can be as easy as, like, putting on a song and dancing around for 2 minutes. Like, I think oh my God, I need to, like, take this, like, 9-week vacation. Like, no, you don't. Just, like dance around in your underwear for, like, 2 minutes. You're fine, right? Like,
yes, or talking to a girlfriend. I don't do that enough because I'm always like, okay, I can't talk now in work mode, but, like, I'm constantly in work mode. So sometimes I'm like, Jesus Christ, Ash, like, take a minute. And I always end the conversation smiling and laughing and totally reset.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it doesn't have to be, like, a 2-hour conversation, right? Like, it could be, like, 15 minutes or this kind. That's something else that I'm working on a lot, too, is, like, I isolated a lot in 2015 for, like, a number of different reasons, living in a new place, not really knowing anyone, you know, going through some depression, like, all things that, like, are made better by reaching out to people, but it's the conditions when you're least likely to reach out to people, right? It's kind of like a negative spiral, catch-22. And, like, that's, like, I actually sat down, like, the beginning of this year and, like, made my list of, like, okay, these are my, like, ride or die people that I know that I can always talk to. These are people that, like, I want to get to know better, whether that's they live here or they live somewhere else. And, like, this sounds, like, so silly, but I, like, have in my planner, like, reminders, like, call/text one of your people. And, like, that sounds really maybe potentially weird, but, like, sometimes I just need that reminder of, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to text my niece, or, like, you know what I mean? Just, like, these little things sometimes that help a lot. So
yes, really does.
So last 2 questions. What's one lesson that keeps coming up for you? Something that it seems like you need to learn and relearn over and over again in your life, that you're like, oh my God, this again? Like, I thought I already learned this thing.
I think really one of the weirdest, challenging things for me is around email. I'm so bad at email. I go through periods where I'm really good at email and being okay with there being emails in my box, or being okay with having perhaps an assistant respond to emails and things that I don't need to technically do. And then I go through periods where I just feel so guilty about it because we're all humans, and maybe there's somebody going through a hard time, and of course they took the time out of their day to write me an email, so I should really, I mean, what kind of an asshole doesn't even respond? And maybe they're going to think that I just don't care, and maybe they're going to go commit suicide because of it. Like, I'm the worst with email. I guilt myself like crazy. So that's always a work in progress because I don't have, and you don't have, emails like normal people do. You know, I have a girlfriend who has a graphic design company, but it's a local graphic design company. She's not blogging on the internet, so she maybe gets like 3 emails a day, and she's on top of it. And then comparing that to hundreds of emails a day, and it's this thing where it's this love-hate relationship. You love email sometimes when you're in the mood and you can feel like you can connect and you feel like you did something good, and then you hate it other times when it feels like it's just this never-ending stream of shit on your shoulders. And even if it's just something as simple as someone giving you a compliment, it also still feels like work. So I'm working that out, if you couldn't tell from this very long and drawn-out answer.
But I mean, that's what this is about, right? Like, that there's, I don't know, like, one of the, like, takeaways that I feel like for me with, like, the mission behind this podcast is, like, there's no magic answers. No one has anything figured out. Like, this is what it's like to, like, just be a messy human. Like, sometimes email's, like, complicated as fuck, right? Like, it's just, yeah. So, no, I like that. There's, like, no right answer. It's just, like, yeah, that's why the question is, like, what keeps coming over? Like, this again? Like, I have to, yeah, I love it.
I wish I had steel balls about email. Like, I just wish, I don't even know what I wish. I just wish email didn't exist.
But then also you don't wish that, right? So it's like, I don't know. It's, yeah, I feel the same way.
Exactly.
So when you look ahead at the next few months, what do you feel most excited about?
It's the book. It really is the book. I am so dedicated to creating a story that is going to change fucking minds. It's going to change people's entire attitude about how they feel about themselves. I want to give people the steel balls. I want them to feel like reading my book has somehow in some way made them a little bit more unfuckwithable. I want them to reread it over and over again every time they need courage, and every time they need bravery, and every time they're about to go do something they're really just not sure of, but they know they want to do. I want this book to be the modern day narrative Bible for chicks who just really need to stop giving so much of a fuck and just go out and do it. And so that's what's got me excited. I'm very happy to be writing it. It feels good. It's the one thing I can say that I would write no matter what. If there was a deal in place or not, I would just be writing it because it's the best gift that I have to give right now.
Girl, amen. I love that. So for people who want to find out more about what you're up to, what's the best place for them to find you online? And then as far as social media goes, what's your favorite way to connect?
I mean, you just can't forget the Middle Finger Project. If you Google it, you will find me. And I love Twitter. I am active on Twitter quite a bit. I love bantering on Twitter because it's fun, it's short, it's snappy, it's something that doesn't totally overwhelm. So I'm able to engage there, and I'm just at TMF Project.
I love
Twitter.
I will put links to all of that in the show notes. Ash, you are the best, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It is so awesome to talk to you.
And that's our show for today. Thanks so much for listening and for being a part of the Real Talk Radio community. If you love what we're doing here, and if you want to support the show and get exclusive access to bonus audio content that's released in the in-between months between podcast seasons, visit patreon.com/Nicole Antoinette for simple instructions on how to become a VIP supporter who gets fun rewards. Until next time, here's a big virtual hug and a reminder that we're all just doing the best we can, and that no matter what, we're in this together.
Episode 20 of the YouTube Creators Hub podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening to the show. Thank you for all the kind words, emails, tweets, and all of that. It's been such a pleasure, as I say, each and every week to compose, produce this show. It's so much fun to talk about something that I am so passionate about with people who are doing it so well. I would like to remind you guys that this show is brought to you by TubeBuddy. TubeBuddy is a fantastic tool that you can utilize to bring you all types of new features such as bulk edits to your cards, annotations, direct upload to Facebook video, among a ton of other just ease of use features that will make your YouTube processing so much easier. So again, the product is TubeBuddy, TubeBuddy. If you click on the link in the show notes, you'll help us out, and you'll also get a special YouTube Creators Hub deal. So again, brought to you by TubeBuddy. In today's interview, I want to open by saying that it's a little different in that in this week's episode, I chat with someone who is utilizing online video in their YouTube channel to create and produce premium courses and selling them on sites like Udemy and making a really, really good income each and every month. So if you're already producing videos out there, there are ways to monetize other than the ad platform, as we talk about each and every week. And this is a unique one here. And I really think you guys are going to enjoy the behind the scenes look at how somebody took the videos they were already creating on YouTube and monetizing them by selling them as a premium content or premium version of their content. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview. I am joined today by Alex Gnadinic from the Start and Grow Your Business YouTube channel. He makes up to 5 figures a month on Udemy with video courses, has been doing this for a couple of years, and has a lot of value to share about creating video and monetizing it in unique ways. Alex, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic, and I'm really excited to be on your show, and I'm really excited to share. I'm going to have some really great strategies and tips for your audience.
Awesome. Well, when you sent me the email and you had a really good headline in that email, it caught my attention. I was like, I've got to have this guy on the show, and I'm going out of town on vacation next week. But as I'm recording this, it will release in 1 week, so I'm so excited for my audience to hear what you've got to offer. So let's talk about you a little bit and what you do online. So you've got a YouTube channel. That YouTube channel's name is Start and Grow Your Business. Got a lot of really good, actionable, entrepreneurial kind of videos up there on the YouTube channel. But how did you get started on YouTube?
Sure. Well, it's funny because my first success was I kind of made some mobile apps for entrepreneurs, and they were successful, like not like Angry Birds are successful apps, right? But they were successful in their own right. Certainly have over 1 million downloads, and then the content in there was all about entrepreneurs and helping entrepreneurs and starting a business. And then people were always asking me like, hey, can you also make videos, right? Especially since I also started like venturing into writing books, and people don't love reading these days anymore, so they were like, make videos. And so I started dabbling in YouTube a few years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, kind of on a regular basis, and I took it seriously, and I was just terrible, just so bad. It took me like 15 minutes to say what really should be said in 2 or 3 minutes. I would talk slow, and I would go like and it was just all bad. But I decided to make a video every day and post something every day for my audience, and over time I never became like an amazing YouTuber like you see people going super viral, but my channel does have over 1 million views, and thousands of new people see my videos every day to this day. And what that really allowed me to do was, at some point, the quality of the videos became good enough to consider like, this is like, hey, this is really good, it's kind of premium stuff, right? And so that's kind of how that was my trajectory towards getting into Udemy and all these things that we're going to discuss. Does that sort of answer your question of how I got into it? But
that answers the question perfectly, and that transitions very well into the next part that I want to ask you about. So when it comes to Udemy, creating online video, so the people listening to this show are trying to grow, monetize, start a YouTube channel, and a lot of times it's hard to monetize our content. We're putting so much effort into it. What have you found by being on Udemy that has been that jumpstart for you, that has allowed you to become so successful selling your content as premium content through avenues and platforms like Udemy?
Sure. One thing that I do want to say is that when we're on YouTube, one thing is that YouTube brands itself as a place for us to make money, but internally they certainly have calculated how we can, for us to really make money, we have to be the top one, beyond the top 1% of YouTubers. I mean, we have to be, just levels and levels, like we have to be amazing, right? To make significant amount. I mean, they really calibrated the revenue that you would get in a big disfavor for publishers, I think, right? I mean, you make a reasonable video, but you probably make pennies, right? So, and that's the beauty of, and it's kind of like the challenge of being a content publisher. And really that's the beauty of Udemy, is that you're not just purely a content publisher, it's more an e-commerce situation, right? Like it's generally e-learning, but it's e-commerce, right? So it's a totally different situation than free, whereas then you have the freemium revenue model where you can try to make money with ads, try to sell some products, but at the end of the day, when a person comes to you, it's free. Whereas Udemy is commerce. It's almost like Amazon, right? Like it's really Amazon for courses, because people want to consume something, well, they have to pay, and they know that. And so that's really the beautiful thing about it, is it's really an e-commerce situation. And what's really good about it is that it kind of gives us a digital product, that is a medium priced product, right? Because prior to that, the digital products used to be kind of like ebooks, which are a very low end product, and typically writers make just a couple of bucks from a sale. So it really helps you as an online entrepreneur, and gives you a having your own premium online course really gives you a mid-range, mid-price product, digital product to sell on your site. And the beauty of the digital product, of course, is like no inventory problems, like none of the traditional product problems, but you get the revenue from a mid-priced product, which is fantastic.
Let's talk about the model for a minute. For people who may be listening that don't understand or haven't ever heard of Udemy or online video courses, basically what you're doing is you're recording online videos, instructing people how to do something via video, through video, and then you're uploading these videos to sites like Udemy or Skillshare, and then what you're doing with that is you're selling those courses as premium content. So every time a student enrolls in one of your premium courses, you're getting paid, correct?
Exactly.
So with that being said, how have you found the transition from creating that free YouTube content to now creating the premium Udemy or the premium video content? What's the difference?
I think students generally expect, to be quite honest, there's so many good things on YouTube that it's extremely difficult to make something totally new and better, right? Because YouTube is really rich. It is a really rich library, and you can probably find 95% of just about anything for free there. So what the Udemy students look for is organization, quality, because a lot of the videos on YouTube, they lack quality, right? A lot of background noise, unprofessional delivery, unprofessional recording, a lot of upselling, a lot of scam, right? So all that stuff is taken out. In Udemy, you really have to clean up your act, right? Like good audio, good video. You gotta become as engaging as possible, because it's a marketplace where you're competing often in the same, like I have a YouTube course, 100 other people have a YouTube course, right? What makes it different? And so part of it is the quality of how you can engage people, right? Because it's not a 2-minute video or 5-minute video, it's a multiple hour course at times, right? Where you think about the lectures, you think about a curriculum, and the most important thing, when a person comes to your Udemy course, whatever your course is about, let's say, like I have a, on topic courses, I have one course of how to get 1 million views on YouTube, right? Well, by the time that student comes, from the time that they start to the time that they finish, my goal as an instructor is that they they really are able to accomplish what the course promises, right? So big promise, a well-organized curriculum, well-made lectures that are organized, that make sense together, and at the end, the student must really, the promise of the course must be satisfied, right? Whereas on YouTube, you kind of care, you kind of don't care, it's free, so nobody really, it's like nobody's held accountable. But here, students can review you, and of course, you must get the best reviews, because if you don't, it's a marketplace. They just are not, next students are just not going to buy your course. They're going to buy this course with better reviews. So the race towards quality is extremely important, and it's one of the main things that sets Udemy courses apart from YouTube.
And isn't one of the benefits to signing up or enrolling and paying for a premium Udemy course as opposed to just seeking it out, the free version on YouTube, isn't the benefit that you have that instructor and student communication? Like when you purchase a course on Udemy, aren't the students able to communicate with you and email you throughout the duration of the course and ask you further questions upon the questions they may have after watching the lectures?
Yeah, you're 100% correct, and I even forgot to mention that, so thank you for bringing it up, because you really get, like the instructor helping you there. Like for example, for me, my goal, and I actually am pretty good at accomplishing this goal, my goal is to answer every question I get within 24 hours within that question being asked. If I'm on vacation, still I allocate some time for, customer support sort of thing, right? Every day. So, and even Udemy, they reward it, because they see it as, if you get more questions, that means your course is more engaging and people are more interested. And they even say, although it's unproven, but they even say that within their algorithm, it's like a +1 to your course if your course gets more questions, more discussions. They see it as a quality signal even.
Because I know me personally, if a lot of things that I search for on how to do on YouTube, if you post a comment in the YouTube comments, it's hit or miss whether or not the person who created that video is even on YouTube, first off. and then secondly, if they'll even respond if they still are on YouTube. So with that being said, I can think of a number of things that I've learned how to do on YouTube that I would have paid 15, 20, 25 bucks to take an entire course on how to learn if I knew the instructor was going to respond to the smaller questions that I had that maybe were not covered as well in the video. So I definitely think that's one of the huge benefits with people thinking about taking an online course. Now, when we're talking about creating these courses and integrating YouTube and our YouTube channels, I know we talked about this a little bit pre-show and you said you weren't doing as much of it now, but what are some ways that you can use your YouTube channel to cross-promote with your premium content on Udemy?
Right. So depending on, you know, on two things, really, the engagement, well, really three things: the size of your channel, the engagement level of your channel, and the demographic of your channel, right? So if your channel is like 5-year-old kids and you have fart jokes, maybe they're not going to buy premium content, right? But if your channel is something insightful and it's something that you are truly an expert in your field and you are respected and people see that you're doing amazing things on YouTube and they really respect you and follow you and trust you, right? If you've built that trust and your audience isn't too young or too impoverished, right? They can afford things. They're professionals, maybe. Then you can put out a video saying, "Hey guys, I created, I know you love my YouTube and I appreciate that you've been following me, but I've put some of my very best tips on, in a complete course, really well thought out, and the course obviously has to have a big promise, like, accomplish XYZ very soon, right? Or, whatever your channel is, but, some really interesting course topic that people are going to be like, wow, I'm curious, right? It will inspire curiosity, get them to click, get them to, read more about it in your description, watch your promotional video, and sort of make their way down your sales funnel to the course. And then so you can announce that to the course saying, hey guys, I've got this amazing thing happening, I got this amazing course, I'd love for you to check it out. Here is a discount coupon, like 50% off or whatever. And that might be a fantastic way that you can leverage the audience that you've been, kind of fostering and growing for free, and building that trust and building that engagement, and using that to generate create a really great product launch for yourself on Udemy, which courses with a great product launch actually they typically do well in Udemy's recommendation algorithm. Because Udemy says, hey, this course is popular, it's getting sales, so it must be good. So their recommendation algorithm kind of gives you a little bit more sales as well. So it really works well together.
And you can kind of use YouTube as like a content gate, right? So you can produce a video about what your course is about on Udemy and make it maybe 3 to 5 minutes of some free content that will help people out. And then kind of at the end of the video, you can plug it by saying, hey, if you like this video and you want to learn more and you want to get in more depth on the topic, go on over, click the link in the description and take my full course on Udemy. So you can kind of use it as like a sales pitch.
Exactly like that, yeah.
Absolutely, that's awesome. So let me ask you this. What is something that you wish that someone would have told you when you first started out on YouTube?
Well, it's really quality, because I was always good at SEO and things like that and marketing, but my quality has always lagged behind because I was never a video producer. I had no idea about how to make good audio, good video. I never gave speeches, right? Like public speaking, that wasn't my thing. And I was doing, my videos are all like public speaking, right? And like talking head videos, instructing people. So I was an absolute novice beginner at everything. And what I would suggest for people is to, so because I was so behind the 8 ball in my quality, I had to overdo it in the marketing and in the volume of the content to get good numbers. And sort of that drove me for a while. But what I would recommend to people is to spend a little bit more time, or a lot more time if possible, on focusing on your quality. And the quality in video being succinctness, the pacing, right? The pacing is generally a term that, it means like how often does value come, right? If you're a comedy show, how often are the jokes coming, right? The interval between jokes. If it's a insightful show, what is the interval between insights, right? And you gotta, the more insights together, the faster they come, the better. So the pacing is important so that people don't get bored, right? Because every day people have shorter and shorter attention spans. So there's, and there's like volume and, audio and video quality. So there's a lot of stuff. And for me, it was really overwhelming. And to a degree, it's still overwhelming because there's no limit to how good your speaking can be, your acting, right? Because if you write a blog, you write the same words, it comes out the same every time. But speaking, no word comes out the same every time. And so it's really hard and to make good video on a consistent basis, every minute being top notch, right? And if some part of your course is not that good, you're gonna have a drop in student engagement and all that kind of stuff, and it's gonna affect your, Udemy ranking, and it's gonna affect your revenue, right? So it directly impacts things. So I think if, one thing I would have done faster is maybe, one thing I would have done differently is maybe get a coach of some sort, because that would have saved me a tremendous amount of time in audio quality, video quality, my speaking, right? And it would have paid for, like a good coach would have paid for themselves many times over, because I myself would have made money faster, because now I make a comfortable living on Udemy and selling courses and all this stuff. But I had a long time of struggle, and to have shortened that struggle would have been priceless.
Absolutely. Now, are there any tools that you use when you create your videos, whether it be hardware, software, internet resource, that you use on a daily basis during your workflow that you just could not live without?
I love actually ScreenFlow. And it's funny to mention because I know you have a Udemy course coming out on ScreenFlow, and ScreenFlow is actually, I actually recommend people that they get your course, because ScreenFlow had revolutionized how I make my Udemy videos. Because prior to that, I needed so much equipment, right? Like I needed a camera, I needed a camera stand, I needed extra space in my apartment, I needed a lot of things, right? And this was not portable for that reason, really. I mean, at least not at a comfortable level. With not to mention I needed a lapel mic, all these things, and if you have a cheap camera, they sometimes don't even come with a mic jack. So there's all kinds of issues, and it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars, camera and everything. And ScreenFlow is $99, and it uses the camera from my MacBook Pro, which is a really good HD camera. So it's the cheapest possible solution. And people might argue here with me on what I'm about to say, but if you're making just online courses or talking head videos, and you don't need recording music level professional audio, you don't even necessarily need a mic, because the built-in mic in the MacBook Pro is quite good, and it's good enough to give you good audio for talking head videos, right? Because people aren't looking for CD quality audio. They just don't need that. So you might be able to get away with good enough audio as well, which will save you a microphone and stuff like that. Although this last point about the audio is a little controversial probably, and some people might not agree. But certainly it saved me, ScreenFlow saved me. I don't need I need extra space to record. I can record anywhere as long as I have my computer, which is far more often than the times where I have my camera with me. So it just really, really helped me. Not to mention that that actually makes it easier for me to teleprompt, because sometimes I make screen recordings of PowerPoints, and the PowerPoints actually are a way for me to teleprompt myself, which actually makes my videos go, it makes my videos tighter. I don't get lost in what I'm talking about in the middle of a video, because it's all there, so and that's actually helped my engagement as well, and reviews and students like that. So yeah, across the board, ScreenFlow, that little piece of software, it's really, really helped me.
The startup cost to do this is not anywhere near what people would maybe imagine it to be. Like you said there, you've got a MacBook, you're doing extremely well, creating valuable content for people. And I think just as it is with YouTube, Alex, I think the key thing with having a successful course, online video course, is basically it's all about the value. It's all about how much value you're bringing the student. If you're not bringing the students value, your course is going to get bad ratings and you're not going to make sales. And it's the same thing with YouTube. If you're not bringing people value with the content you're producing, you're not going to be able to grow your YouTube channel. So I don't want people to think they can just throw up anything on Udemy and they're going to make money. It has to be valuable. And I definitely would second what you're saying there. When you're creating online courses, you're going to need something to record your screen. So ScreenFlow is a fantastic option for Mac. I appreciate the plug there for my course. I am testing out Udemy, trying to figure out other ways to monetize my content. And then if you're on a PC, if you're a PC user, there's a piece of software called Camtasia that I use on my PC when I do video tutorials on a Windows computer, and it works just as well as ScreenFlow. So definitely those two things are critical. Now let's talk money for a minute, Alex. You've been doing this for a while, just over 2 years. I know you don't want to divulge exactly how much you're making a month, and I know it varies month to month, but just for our audience, so they know that there's a tangible number out there from this guy speaking on a podcast they're listening to, what is a number that you're comfortable sharing with our audience that you're making monthly that is allowing you to do this full time?
Oh, it's funny because, to be able to do this full time, you really just need a middle class salary, whatever that means, wherever you live in the world, right? So, I mean, if you live somewhere, in a impoverished country, that may be only $1,000 a month, which is super attainable, right? I happen to be in New York, so even if you're like 6 figures, you're still poor, right? So it's actually kind of true. Like, here, I was ecstatic when I was making, I struggled for a while. I struggled, there was like my first 8 months on Udemy was just my learning curve. And I was just making, a few $100s a month, and I'm a little bit amazed that I got over that hump, which is another reason why I recommend people get, different kinds of coaching, because I would have now, looking back, I would have done anything to have shortened that struggle. But at one point I started making, like over $1,000 a month, and I was ecstatic about that. And then another, it kept growing and growing, and then I was like, made $5,000 a month, and I was like, unbelievable, right? Because then, in a sense, you're kind of middle class, right? And that was like a big step in revenue. And then it started, like, there was some time where I was making like 5 figures a month, right? And I was like, wow, okay, I'm like upper class now. Like, this is like unbelievable, right? Because then, it's largely passive income. So if you want to keep it that way, you can have a mostly free life. Like, maybe out of the 30 days of the month, you could easily have 20 days where just chilling. It's just like hanging out. I don't recommend that, because I know myself that I don't do that, because you never want to lose that thirst, right? Because there's very few times in life where things are working so well, and my take is you got to press the gas on it double, right? You got to really press on it, because you don't know when a second chance like that is going to happen, so you don't want to squander it or have a less than optimal outcome eventually. So, but you certainly could go traveling and just enjoy life.
Talking about that journey that you just talked about, going from the first 8 months making a few $100s a month to eventually making 5 figures in some months, how many courses did you have on Udemy within the first few months, and how many courses do you have on there now? And what's the difference in, obviously you're going to make more money because you have more courses, so what would you recommend somebody thinking about doing this, as far as, like, obviously you've got to start somewhere, you're only going to have one course on there to begin with, but what's a good number to try to obtain to try to get a steady sense of source of income?
That's a great question, because one mistake I made in the beginning, because I wasn't sure what Udemy was going to do for me, right? Like, on day one, you have no idea what your future holds, right? Today, hindsight is 2020, but then I was, a typical entrepreneur, right? Like, struggling, pressed for time, not sure if this new platform is going to work for me, right? Probably like many of your current listeners are probably that's what's going through their mind. Like, is this going to work for me? Nobody knows, right? I don't know, they don't know, right? And that's the problem that I was facing, is that I had no idea. So what I had to do is cut some corners, and I took a lot of my YouTube things and made kind of like rickety courses out of those, right? And they were not great. And because they were not great, there was a struggle for me, and I probably could have cut that struggle if I had focused on quality earlier. And so that 8 months, part of it was learning to sell, but part of it was learning to create quality courses, because all the courses I created in the beginning, I later went through them and refilmed them entirely. So the course is the same, but all the content in it was different. And you know, that was a big mistake that I think could have like really shortened my time had I been already good in the beginning. And you know, one great thing about Udemy is when they actually invited me into their office and kind of had some of the people in their team, because they saw I was making courses, multiple courses, and you know, kind of investing a lot of effort into it, and they really sat down with me and explained to me what it meant for a course to be of high quality and to do well. And that really helped me, because once I thought about how to implement the strategy, and once I was able to implement that, really made a tremendous difference. So in a sense, it's not about the number of courses, because like I have a lot of courses today, like, you know, we're talking today, I have 82 public courses, and I have some courses that you don't even see that, you know, like I helped other companies launch them, and I'm an invisible third instructor, basically just collecting some revenue from their sales. So I have a lot of courses, really. And you know, a lot of it I would say are duds. A lot of the courses are duds. And it's really like what's called a hits business, I guess, where, you know, like 2 of my courses can sometimes make, you know, almost maybe 60% to 70%, let's say 60 or 50% maybe, to, you know, on the safe side, of my entire monthly revenue, right? So I have 2 courses that do well, and I have a lot of courses that do just okay, and I have a lot of courses that make almost nothing, and for various reasons. Maybe they're not that great, maybe I made them, you know, like when I still wasn't great at making courses, you know, or maybe they're in a niche that's just not a lucrative niche. You know, like I have a philosophy course, for example, and it has amazing engagement and good reviews and everything, right? But people just don't want to study philosophy. They don't want to pay to study philosophy. But I loved it when I was in college, so it was like a favorite course of mine to make, but it doesn't sell. So, you know, there's those instances. So it's kind of like, I think for new instructors, what I would say is you gotta keep making courses. Usually people who have one course, it's not the best situation, because you gotta have multiple courses, and then it will give you this sense of like understanding of like, you know, one course is doing well, another course is doing less well. What's the difference? And you experiment. The more courses you have like that, the more experiments you have like that, and then you'll almost figure out like the formula for making successful courses. And for many of the successful instructors today, that's been the situation. There's very few people who have just one course, right? So it's about making courses and about figuring out how to make better courses in a shorter amount of time, because you don't want to over-invest in a course, because it might be a dud. You know, I can't. You know, there's no guarantees. You know, it's very competitive on Udemy today. You know, and especially if you're a new instructor starting out, you don't have a good nose for, like, you don't have a sense of smell for like what might become a good course and what might not, right? So there's a learning curve on that, on marketing them. So
briefly explain, Alex, you just mentioned there in talking about this that you had worked with companies to where you're basically just the instructor, but you're just getting the revenue from the courses. Can you explain briefly, real quickly, how that came about and what that process is like?
Yeah, so there's a dating company, right? Something that, you know, I'm not an expert. I'm like a, you know, whatever. I'm like everyone else, but I'm not an expert, right? So this dating company approached me, and they coach in this field, and they know nothing about courses. They know nothing about video, but they know coaching. I know nothing about their, you know, expert subject matter, but like I know Udemy and I know video, right? So we came together, and what I did, I filmed it, I directed it, I posted, and now I managed their account, you know, because they don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And basically, I just collect like an agreed upon revenue stream, like revenue percentage, right? And so they have a revenue percentage, and I have a revenue percentage. But they are the visible instructor, because, you know, they are actually the instructor, right? I'm just like more like in that particular course, I'm not the expert. I'm just like the video guy or whatever, or I just manage their account. So that's kind of how that works.
So how did you get in touch with that company? As far as like, is there a place where you can go to get in touch with companies who are looking for people who know how to produce video content and looking for them to do something like that?
There isn't. That one, it was like a one-off. They contacted me, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, like briefly, and then 6 months later we talked about it more, and then we kind of got together and did it. But and that thing actually, we talked about something similar previously, and let me make a distinction. That particular thing actually, it didn't turn out to be a good. It just turned out to be an okay partnership. Like, none of us made a lot of money from that. What does work really well is now, because I have a large library of courses, other companies, let's say other like fledgling online education companies, or like Udemy, but just starting out, right? Or maybe experts, like for example, like let's say for example, exactly like yourself, right? So you're creating your first Udemy course and things like that. But what if you sold your course because you're going to be selling your course to your audience as well, right? So you might do better selling it on your own website, right? So a lot of people prefer to sell on their own websites, just because they can be more flexible. They don't need to follow Udemy terms of service. A lot of benefits to selling it on your own website. Some challenges, but there's some benefits. And so some people like that, every once in a while they come to me, and it's like they can sell on their websites, they have an audience, but they don't have content. They don't have the premium content. And so they come to me and they license out my content. Basically put my courses, which are proven, they get good reviews, all that kind of stuff, and they license from me the courses, and they put it on their sites and sell my courses, right? And immediately gives them like a medium to high-end product, because it's on their site, they can charge more money to their audience, right? So it gives them a digital product, which is a medium to high-end product, and they can make a lot of money doing that, because if they can sell that product for a significant amount of money to their audience, after they cover the cost of licensing it, it's all pure profit, because it's digital, right? There's no inventory, nothing. So that has been a really winning thing for me and for other people, because they get my content, it's ready-made, and they can start selling it tomorrow, right? As opposed to creating their own course, struggling with like, what does it mean to have a good course, going through the 8 months of like struggle that I went through before I figured out how to make good courses. So those two situations, the fledgling Udemy knockoffs, not knockoffs, but like, kind of Me Too's, or, online course sites, and just experts who have audiences who need content to sell. That actually has been tremendous for me, and it's really given me, like Udemy gives me like 5 figures a month, but that thing can also give me 5 figures a month, so, and together it's a really significant income, made from online education.
This is extremely interesting, Alex. Diving into this, I've been listening intently, hanging off every word that you're saying, because number one, I'm intrigued by this. I want to see if I can do something in this space and then come back to my audience and kind of tell them what I did successfully, what I did wrong, and maybe get them on the right path a little quicker than I'm going to be. But it's so interesting how we can use video content like this and sell it as premium content if we're doing it well. So in closing, Alex, what would be a 1 to 2 sentence piece of advice that you would give somebody who is thinking about starting their own online course? What would you tell them?
It's all about, the sooner you can get to a high production quality, the sooner you will get fantastic results. I think for people starting out as well, having said that, do not forget about the importance of spending a lot of time on your marketing of your courses, because if you don't market your courses, it might be crickets, it might be disappointing, and then and then it really becomes a lot to wrap your mind around, right? Quality of audio, video, delivery, marketing, a lot of stuff, right? And you have to do it all at a high level quickly, because if you don't do it quickly, you're going to struggle financially, and you might have to quit because you might have to get a job or whatever. So to make your road easier and to help you avoid a lot of pitfalls, I would also strongly recommend that you get some kind of quality coaching to help you through this process. Because if you can get through this process like in 2 months instead of the 8 months that I had to struggle, I mean, that's priceless.
Speaking of coaching, where can people find you online?
So people can email me. My email is brutal to spell because it has my last name in it. So why don't people go to your show notes page, and then they can find my email there and just email me. My email is alex.genedinik@gmail.com, but it's just easier if they go to your show notes page for the show. And if you just tell what episode number will this be?
This will be episode number 20.
So episode number 20, easy to find on your website. My email is there. I think a lot of the links to my courses might be there. I'm always happy to hear from people, and especially today, I am taking a very few, but I am taking on people who, as a coach, to coach them through the Udemy process. But more, I'm actually focusing on people who want to sell my content on their site. Who want to license out my content to have a product for themselves to sell on their site. I'm actually actively looking to work with people doing that, and I would especially love to hear from anybody interested in doing that with me.
Absolutely. Alex, you have no idea how much I appreciate you coming on the show, dropping the value that you dropped, and keep on doing what you're doing, Alex, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you for having me on. It was really actually fun to do this, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to the YouTube Creators Podcast. We want to thank you and invite you to subscribe to the show, as well as support us on Patreon for great perks, such as having your YouTube channel featured on the show and a link on our website. Until next time, keep uploading those videos.
This is the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Dr. Michael Beerer. This week, June 9th, 2016, we feature articles on a genetic classification of AML, indacaterol glycopyrronium versus salmeterol fluticasone for COPD, methods of ablation for atrial fibrillation, the genetic diagnosis of neurometabolic disorders, and long non-coding RNA in breast cancer, a review article on hematopoietic cell transplantation and kidneys, a case report of a woman with increasing dyspnea, and perspective articles on saving Tiny Tim and on the hell of Syria's field hospitals. This week we feature a new interactive medical case on a woman with dyspnea and altered mental status. This interactive feature presents a 59-year-old woman with systemic lupus erythematosus who presented to the emergency department with new-onset lethargy and shortness of breath. Test your diagnostic and therapeutic skills at nejm.org. Genomic Classification and Prognosis in Acute Myeloid Leukemia by Ellie Papa-Emmanuel from the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute, Hingston, United Kingdom. Have provided a detailed census of genes that are mutated in acute myeloid leukemia, AML. Our next challenge is to understand how this genetic diversity defines the pathophysiology of AML and informs clinical practice. These authors report a comprehensive study of leukemia genes in 3 clinical trials of intensive AML treatment involving 1,540 patients. The authors identified 5,234 driver mutations across 76 genes or genomic regions, with 2 or more drivers identified in 86% of the patients. Patterns of co-mutation compartmentalized the cohort into 11 classes, each with distinct diagnostic features and clinical outcomes. In addition to currently defined AML subgroups, 3 heterogeneous genomic categories emerged: AML with mutations in genes encoding chromatin and RNA splicing regulators in 18% of patients. AML with TP53 mutations, chromosomal aneuploidies, or both, in 13%. And provisionally, AML with IDH2R172 mutations in 1%. Patients with chromatin spliceosome and TP53 aneuploidy AML had poor outcomes. The prognostic effects of individual mutations were often significantly altered by the presence or absence of other driver mutations. The driver landscape in AML reveals distinct molecular subgroups that reflect discrete paths in the evolution of AML, informing disease classification and prognostic stratification. Aaron Viney from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York, writes in an editorial that Papa Emanuel and colleagues provide practice-changing insights that redefine molecular classification of AML and elucidate a deeper understanding of the ordinal events that drive the development of leukemia. Robert Frost eloquently described in his poem, The Road Not Taken, how we are often asked to choose between different roads, each a distinct path leading to a different destination. Papa Emanuel and colleagues provide an unprecedented understanding of the different roads that lead to AML, and how the specific path from normal blood cell to leukemia has important biologic and clinical implications. These data can be used to inform the development of mechanism-based clinical trials of AML that involve the presence of specific mutations and co-mutations. The clonal phylogeny of AML is not random, but follows distinct roads characterized by unique initiating and transforming events. And that has made all the difference. Indacaterol glycopyrronium versus salmeterol fluticasone for COPD by Jadwiga Bedczyka from Imperial College London, United Kingdom. In the FLAME trial, 3,362 patients who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease with a history of at least one exacerbation during the previous year were randomly assigned to receive by inhalation either the long-acting beta agonist, LABA, indacaterol, plus the long-acting muscarinic antagonist, LAMA, glycopyrronium, once daily, or the LABA salmeterol plus the inhaled glucocorticoid fluticasone twice daily. Indacaterol glycopyrronium showed not only non-inferiority, but also superiority to salmeterol fluticasone in reducing the annual rate of all COPD exacerbations. The rate was 11% lower in the indacaterol glycopyrronium group than in the salmeterol fluticasone group. The indacaterol glycopyrronium group had a longer time to the first exacerbation than did the salmeterol fluticasone group, 71 days versus 51 days. The annual rate of moderate or severe exacerbations was lower in the indacaterol glycopyrronium group than in the salmeterol fluticasone group, 0.98 versus 1.19. And the time to the first moderate or severe exacerbation was longer in the indacaterol glycopyronium group, as was the time to the first severe exacerbation. Indacaterol glycopyronium was more effective than salmeterol fluticasone in preventing COPD exacerbations in patients with a history of exacerbation during the previous year. In an editorial, James Donahue from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill writes that physicians who treat patients with COPD should continue to use guidelines to determine the appropriate regimen for the various phenotypes of COPD. The FLAME trial shows that the use of a LABA-LAMA regimen appears to be safe and efficacious with respect to a wide variety of outcomes, including exacerbation rate, lung function, and health status. However, does the FLAME trial provide sufficient data to support the use of a LABA-LAMA regimen over the use of a LABA inhaled glucocorticoid regimen in patients in GOLD group C or D, that is, high-risk patients who have a history of exacerbations? The FLAME trial seems to indicate that the answer is yes. More trials, especially trials that have a longer duration, include more patients with severe disease and coexisting conditions, and examine additional biomarkers, are needed before we can be sure that the FLAME trial has cast a new light on the prevention of COPD exacerbations. Cryoballoon or radiofrequency ablation for paroxysmal atrial fibrillation by Karl-Heinz Koch from Asklepios Klinik St. Georg, Hamburg, Germany. Current guidelines recommend pulmonary vein isolation by means of catheter ablation as treatment for drug-refractory paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. Radiofrequency ablation is the most common method, and cryoballoon ablation is the second most frequently used technology. This randomized trial assessed whether cryoballoon ablation was non-inferior to radiofrequency ablation in 762 symptomatic patients with drug-refractory paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. The mean duration of follow-up was 1.5 years. The primary efficacy endpoint, which was the first documented clinical failure, occurred in 138 patients in the cryoballoon group and in 143 in the radiofrequency group. 1-year Kaplan-Meier event rate estimates 34.6% and 35.9% respectively. The primary safety endpoint, which was a composite of death, cerebrovascular events, or serious treatment-related adverse events, occurred in 40 patients in the cryoballoon group and in 51 patients in the radiofrequency group. 1-year Kaplan-Meier event rate estimates 10.2% and 12.8% respectively. Cryoballoon ablation was non-inferior to radiofrequency ablation with respect to efficacy for the treatment of patients with drug-refractory paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, and there was no significant difference between the two methods with regard to overall safety. Exome Sequencing and the Management of Neurometabolic Disorders by Maya Torello-Grauvac from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. To uncover the genetic basis of potentially treatable inborn errors of metabolism, these investigators performed whole exome sequencing on 47 consecutively enrolled patients with intellectual developmental disorder and unexplained metabolic phenotypes. Of these patients, 6 were excluded. The remaining 41 probands had been born to predominantly non-consanguineous parents of European descent. In 37 probands, the investigators identified variants in 2 genes newly implicated in disease, 9 candidate genes, 22 known genes with newly identified phenotypes, and 9 genes with expected phenotypes. In most of the genes, the variants were classified as either pathogenic or probably pathogenic. Complex phenotypes of patients in 5 families were explained by coexisting monogenic conditions. A diagnosis was obtained in 68% of probands who were evaluated. A test of a targeted intervention was performed in 44% of patients. Deep phenotyping and whole exome sequencing in 41 probands with intellectual developmental disorder and unexplained metabolic abnormalities led to a diagnosis in 68%, the identification of 11 candidate genes newly implicated in neurometabolic disease, and a change in treatment beyond genetic counseling in 44%. Renal complications of hematopoietic cell transplantation, a review article by Sangeeta Hingorani from the University of Washington School of Medicine, Seattle. Each year, approximately 50,000 patients worldwide undergo hematopoietic cell transplantation. Despite the overall improvement in outcomes after hematopoietic cell transplantation, kidney injury remains a frequent complication and contributes to the morbidity and mortality associated with the procedure. The onset of acute kidney injury and chronic kidney disease, which affect from 10 to 70% of transplant recipients, varies from days after transplantation to months or years afterward. acute injury is generally indicated by elevated levels of serum creatinine up to 100 days after transplantation, and chronic injury by elevated levels at or after 100 days. The overall health of the patient at the time of transplantation is generally assessed with use of a hematopoietic cell transplantation specific comorbidity index that includes the serum creatinine level. Scores range from 0 to 12. A score of 1 or more is correlated with a risk of acute post-transplantation kidney injury. Such kidney injury may be caused by conditioning chemotherapy, total body irradiation, nephrotoxic agents, infections, the hepatic sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, transplantation-associated thrombotic microangiopathy, and graft versus host disease. This article reviews the causes, diagnosis, and management of renal complications and disorders after hematopoietic cell transplantation. A 60-year-old woman with increasing dyspnea, a case record of the Massachusetts General Hospital by Sidney Montassi and colleagues. A 60-year-old woman was seen in a pulmonary clinic because of increasing dyspnea. 2 years earlier, episodes of mild, non-productive coughing developed and occurred multiple times daily. 3 febrile illnesses occurred. After the third illness, the patient noted dyspnea with exertion. Her dyspnea worsened and was associated with fevers and chest congestion. Her condition did not improve with the use of an inhaled glucocorticoid combined with a long-acting beta agonist. On current examination, her oxygen saturation while she was breathing ambient air was abnormal. She had no wheezing or crackles on physical examination. CT of the chest revealed diffuse gas trapping, mild bronchial wall thickening, and mild bronchiectasis. Results of pulmonary function testing included a progressive, severe obstructive ventilatory defect, increasing hyperinflation, and worsening diffusion impairment. Obliterative bronchiolitis is a condition in which the airway lumen of the bronchioles become narrowed. It is progressive and can result in respiratory failure because the bronchioles may ultimately become obliterated. It has been described in conjunction with exposure to certain medications and exposure to certain toxins. This patient had no known exposures. The findings on a wedge biopsy of the right lung were consistent with the diagnosis of obliterative bronchiolitis with fibrosis. Targeting a long non-coding RNA in breast cancer, a clinical implications of basic research article by Joshua Mendel from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, Dallas. The central dogma of molecular biology posits that genes are transcribed into messenger RNA, mRNA, which is then translated into proteins, which in turn are ultimately responsible for all cellular functions. Yet recent research has revealed that RNAs that do not encode proteins, known as non-coding RNAs, play important roles in normal physiological processes and can contribute to human diseases such as cancer. In fact, only approximately 1.5% of the roughly 3 billion base pairs of DNA in the human genome represent protein coding sequence, whereas a beneficial effects resulting from pharmacologic inhibition of a non-coding RNA. Recent results of a study, however, provide an exciting example of the potential of non-coding RNAs as therapeutic targets in the treatment of breast cancer. Moreover, the experimental strategy that they used could be broadly applicable to the treatment of many human diseases. A new label for mifepristone, an editorial by Michael Green from Massachusetts General Hospital, Boston, and Jeffrey Drazen, editor-in-chief for the journal. On March 30th, the Food and Drug Administration released the new label for mifepristone, which included 3 important revisions: recommending the 200 milligram dose, 1 pill, rather than the originally approved 600 milligram dose, 3 pills; extending the indication for use to pregnancies of less than 70 days duration; and formally eliminating the requirement that the dose of misoprostol be given in a medical facility, including a protracted stay for observation. The changes included in the new label should substantially improve access to medical terminations of pregnancy, not only by reducing the cost of the medication, but also by formally eliminating the requirement for a clinic visit for misoprostol administration and expanding the gestational age range for which the treatment is indicated. Although these label changes may be dismissed as trivial, as the FDA merely catching up with common practice, doing so would underestimate their importance. Several states have passed laws or written regulations to mandate compliance with the more expensive, burdensome, and restrictive requirements of the older labeling. Passage of those targeted regulations has been justified as necessary to protect the health and safety of women seeking these services. The new mifepristone label will strip away that fig leaf, and failure to adopt the new, less restrictive label in laws and regulations will expose the more restrictive regulations for their true intent. Saving Tiny Tim: Pediatrics and Childhood Poverty in the United States. A perspective article by Perry Klass from New York University, New York. When Dr. Klass talks about child poverty, she often begins with iconic 19th century literary images. Hans Christian Andersen's Little Match Girl freezing to death on the street on New Year's Eve. But extreme child poverty is real. In the United States today, nearly 7 million children live in deep poverty, with a family income less than half of the federal poverty level, and well over 1 million live in extreme poverty, in families with incomes of less than $2 per day per family member. The detrimental effects on children's lives are serious, and they lack simple storybook resolutions. But the policy statement on poverty and child health in the United States, issued by the American Academy of Pediatrics in March, is more than symbolic. A landmark for pediatricians and organized pediatrics, it represents another honorable step on the trajectory toward understanding and confronting the new morbidity, a phrase that describes a range of behavioral, developmental, and functional problems. The new policy statement asks that we screen all children, and it suggests several tools. In the case of pediatricians and poverty, the hope is that we, and the pediatric medical home, can get better at helping families connect to the resources that are often out there. Mitigation is important, but it isn't enough without working for systemic changes that reduce child poverty by changing the larger balance between what families earn and what they owe. Charles Dickens knew the most important lesson about child poverty. Children are poor because their families are poor. In A Christmas Carol, Tiny Tim is stunted and damaged by poverty, almost to the point of death, but Dickens reprieved him. Tiny Tim reminds us that the devastations and damage of poverty can in fact be mitigated, alleviated, lifted, if the will is there to do it. The Hell of Syria's Field Hospitals, a perspective article by Samir Attar from Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, Chicago. "Where's my mom?" a boy asked as he woke from surgery. Both his legs had been amputated when a missile hit his home in Aleppo. His mother had died in the blast. It didn't take him long to realize the answer. Every time Dr. Attar has volunteered to work in a field hospital caring for Syrian patients, he has witnessed similar horrors. And whereas he never stays more than a month, Syrian physicians have endured these conditions for years, many working in caves and basements under persistent siege and bombardment. Each day is the same, cleaning mutilated wounds, amputating obliterated limbs, and watching people die in overcrowded emergency rooms with pitiful resources. How can we comfort the families? How can we answer the patients? On a recent visit to a border hospital in Jordan, Dr. Attar entered one room that held 2 little girls with traumatic brain injury from shrapnel and concussive bomb blasts. Next door were 3 young siblings who had been severely burned when a rocket hit their home. Dr. Attar's experience is merely a glimpse of the systematic campaigns of torture, starvation, aerial bombardment, and chemical weapons deployment that are still threatening the Syrian people in their homeland. All Dr. Attar can do from here is bring attention to the suffering of the Syrian people, raise awareness for the exhausted medical workers who care for them, and continue to advocate for their support and protection. Our Images in Clinical Medicine features a 48-year-old man with a history of end-stage renal disease who had undergone parathyroidectomy owing to tertiary hyperparathyroidism 1 month earlier, who presented to the emergency department with weakness and diffuse muscle aches after missing a hemodialysis session. The laboratory analysis showed severe hyperkalemia, potassium level 36.0 milligrams per deciliter, and severe hypocalcemia, calcium level 5.0 milligrams per deciliter, with an ionized calcium level of 1.84 milligrams per deciliter. The phosphate level was 6.2 milligrams per deciliter, the magnesium level 2.7 milligrams per deciliter, and the albumin level 3.6 grams per deciliter. The initial electrocardiogram showed peaked T waves and a prolonged QT segment. The patient underwent emergency hemodialysis, which resulted in a marked improvement in the electrolyte balance and the normalization of T waves on the electrocardiogram, although the QT segment remained prolonged. The patient's hospital course was notable for prolonged hypocalcemia, referred to as the hungry bone syndrome. It is thought that the acute withdrawal of parathyroid hormone after surgery results in an imbalance of calcium homeostasis, leading to hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, hypophosphatemia, and hyperkalemia. After calcium and vitamin D replacement therapy, this patient's calcium level increased to 7.9 milligrams per deciliter, and the QT segment normalized. A previously healthy 76-year-old man with a 1-week history of continuous chest pain presented to the emergency department with rapidly progressive dyspnea on exertion. His blood pressure was 70/40 millimeters of mercury, and he had signs of systemic hypoperfusion. Cardiac auscultation revealed a harsh holosystolic murmur, which was heard over the entire precordium. The electrocardiogram showed inferior ST segment elevations that were consistent with acute or subacute myocardial infarction. Transthoracic echocardiography revealed a left ventricle with overall preserved systolic function and inferior akinesis, a dilated, severely impaired right ventricle, and a large, sharply demarcated interventricular septal defect with a large, turbulent left-to-right transeptal flow. See the videos at nejm.org. Coronary angiography revealed occlusion of the right coronary artery. Emergency surgical intervention was performed because of persistent cardiogenic shock despite supportive therapies, including intra-aortic balloon pump. Closure of the septal defect was not successful owing to the fragility of the infarcted tissue. The patient died from progressive heart failure. This concludes the summary of the June 9, 2016 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine. We're interested in your feedback about our audio summaries. Any comments or suggestions may be sent to audio@nejm.org. Thank you for listening.
people using heroin in recent years, from 373,000 past year users in 2007 to 669,000 in 2012. It is clear that we can't arrest our way out of the drug problem. Science has shown us that drug addiction is a disease of the brain, a disease that can be prevented, treated, and from which one can recover. We know that substance use disorders, including those driven by opioids, are a progressive disease. It is important to consider and understand that many people who develop a substance use disorder begin using at a very young age and often start with alcohol and tobacco. We know that as an individual's abuse of prescription opioids becomes more frequent or chronic, that person is more inclined to purchase these drugs from dealers or obtain prescriptions from multiple doctors, rather than simply getting them from friends and family for free or without asking. Left untreated, this progression of an opioid use disorder may lead an individual to pursue lower cost and more potent alternatives, particularly heroin. With these circumstances in mind, we released the Obama administration's inaugural drug control strategy in 2010, in which we set out a wide array of actions to expand public health interventions and criminal justice reforms to reduce drug use and its consequences. That strategy noted opioid overdoses as a growing national crisis and set specific goals for reducing drug use, including heroin. 3 years ago, the administration released the first comprehensive action plan to combat the prescription drug use epidemic. The Prescription Drug Abuse Prevention Plan strikes a balance between the need to prevent diversion and abuse and the need to ensure legitimate access to prescription pain medication. The plan expands on the National Drug Control Strategy and brings together a variety of federal, state, local, and tribal partners to support 1. the expansion of state-based prescription drug monitoring programs, 2. more convenient and environmentally responsible disposal methods to remove expired or unneeded medication from the home, 3. educating patients about opioid drugs and instructing healthcare providers in proper prescribing practices and treatment of substance use disorders, and 4. reducing the prevalence of pill mills and doctor shopping through enforcement efforts. This work has been paralleled by efforts to address heroin trafficking and heroin use. The administration is also focusing on several key areas to reduce and prevent opioid overdoses, including educating the public about overdose risks and interventions, and increasing access to naloxone, an emergency overdose reversal medication. Because police are often the first of the scene of an overdose, the administration has strongly encouraged local law enforcement agencies to train and equip their personnel with this life-saving drug. 22 states, plus the District of Columbia, have implemented a law or developed a pilot program to allow the administration of this medication by a professional or layperson to reverse the effects of an opiate-related overdose. We are also working with states to promote Good Samaritan laws so that bystanders to an overdose will take appropriate action and help save lives. We are heartened that 17 states plus the District of Columbia had now adopted Good Samaritan laws. While it is critical for us to save lives, we also need a comprehensive response to prevent overdose deaths. A smart public health approach requires us to catch the signs and symptoms of substance use earlier, before it develops into a chronic disorder. We have been encouraging the use of screening and brief intervention to catch risky substance use before it becomes an addiction. And since only 11% of those who need substance use disorder treatment in 2010 actually received it, the administration is dramatically expanding access to treatment. The Affordable Care Act and federal parity law are extending access to substance use disorders and mental health benefits for an estimated 62 million Americans, helping to close the treatment gap and integrate substance use treatment into mainstream healthcare. This represents the largest expansion of treatment access in a generation and will help guide millions of Americans into successful recovery. The standard of care for treating substance use disorders driven by heroin or prescription opioids involves the use of medication-assisted treatment, an approach to treating opiate addiction that utilizes behavioral therapy along with FDA-approved medications, either methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone. Medication-assisted treatment already has helped thousands of people in long-term recovery. A prime goal of our office is to increase access to medication-assisted treatment within existing treatment programs and through integration with primary care. There are some signs that these national efforts are working. The number of Americans 12 and older initiating the non-medical use of prescription opioids in the past year has decreased significantly since 2009. Additionally, according to the latest Monitoring the Future survey, in 2013, the rate of past year use of OxyContin and Vicodin among high school seniors was at its lowest since 2002. And recent studies have shown that the implementation of robust naloxone distribution programs and the expansion of medication-assisted treatment programs can reduce overdose deaths and also be cost-effective. Nonetheless, continuing challenges with prescription opioids and the reemergence of heroin use underscore the need for leadership at all levels of government. We will therefore continue to work with our federal, state, tribal, and community partners to continue to reduce and prevent the health and safety consequences of prescription opioids and heroin. Thank you.
You're listening to the Drug Policy Facts Podcast. I'm your host, Doug McVeigh, editor of drugwarfacts.org. Back to that Senate Narcotics Caucus hearing, and finally, let's hear from a couple of the senators themselves. Warning, the following contains uninformed blather, made quite scary by the fact that the speakers, Senators Dianne Feinstein and Mitch McConnell, have real political power.
Recently, the media has chronicled a resurgence of heroin abuse in the United States, and actually more heroin being moved into the country. According to a 2012 national survey, 666,000 Americans reported using heroin during the previous year. That number has steadily grown over the past several years. So this begs the question, why are more people using heroin? And this is the Senate Caucus on International Drug Control, but the reason to control it is to keep it out of our country and to do those things which prevent opiate use, not to enable it. But one answer, according to the experts, may be the country's addiction and use of prescription pain medications. And here's why. A report released by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration indicates that individuals who use prescription pain relievers for non-medical purposes were 19 times more likely to use heroin in the past year than those who had not. That's an amazing thing to me. Furthermore, 4 out of every 5 heroin abusers had abused prescription pain relievers in the past. So pain relievers like oxycodone and hydrocodone affect the central nervous system in much the same way as heroin. So the lesson here is that rather than thinking of 2 separate addictions, prescription pain medications and heroin, we should realize that we're facing a much larger opiate addiction epidemic that includes both. So the strategy to battle these drugs should have 3 parts: preventing drug abuse, treating addicts, and reducing the number of overdoses. But the first and most important strategy is to prevent drug abuse before it starts. And this means educating communities and youth about the dangers. Now, some communities already do this through the federal Drug-Free Communities program. In California, there's a program called Placer Youth, and that program has contributed to a 50% reduction in prescription drug use among 11th graders between 2011 and 2013. So these programs, I believe, can work. It also means, though, recognizing that all stakeholders share a responsibility that prescription opioids are prescribed and dispensed only for legitimate medical purposes. State-based prescription drug monitoring programs, along with mandatory checks of electronic databases, can help doctors and pharmacists identify drug abusers. Since requiring mandatory checks, New York has seen a 75% decrease in doctor shopping and significant reductions in pain reliever prescriptions. So drug take-back programs can also help reduce opioid abuse because they get use prescription pain medicines out of families' medicine cabinets, where too many young adults first obtain these drugs. So, and heroin entering the United States from other countries also must be addressed. The DEA's heroin signature program in 2012 determined that 90% of wholesale heroin seizures were able to be traced from Mexico or South America. DEA also reports that the Mexican-based Sinaloa drug cartel is expanding its market eastward and producing and selling heroin that is more pure. In other words, going from the brown to the white heroin. Between 2008 and 2013, heroin seizures along the southwest border increased nearly fourfold, from 559 kilograms to 2,196. The second key strategy in this fight is successful treatment, which often includes medication-assisted therapies using drugs like methadone and, you're going to have trouble with this one, buprenorphine, thank you, sirs. Unfortunately, in 2012, 2.5 million people in our country were addicted to these opioids, while only 351,000 received these methadones or buprenorphine to treat their addiction. So that means that the rest are not receiving treatment. Finally, the third strategy is to address overdose deaths. In 2010, the latest year for which data is available, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported more than 19,500 unintentional opioid overdose deaths. Now, there are steps that can be taken. There are drugs that immediately reverse these overdoses, and 18 states, including California, have taken actions to improve access to these drugs. So I think we need to find a way to make these drugs more readily available to properly trained individuals, including first responders. So I think we have an interesting hearing. I do want to point out, if you look over at those charts, you see the rate of opioid sales, overdose deaths, and treatment between 1999 and 2010. And in this, I've lost the copy, here's the chart. The green is treatment admissions, the red are deaths, and the blue are sales. And as you can see, they're all going up in this country. So I think that's a good chart that really discusses what we're about. The other quick point is that heroin abuse increases as access to prescription painkillers decrease. Now that's a brand new thing for me, and that's what this other chart shows. So I would hope that some of you in your testimony would remark on this. And now I'd like to recognize the distinguished Vice Chairman, who you certainly can.
I'd like to defer to Senator.
Put on your microphone.
I'd like to defer to Senator McConnell and thank him for his interest in this issue. And then.
And I thank you as well, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Feinstein, Senator Grassley, for the opportunity to be here today to testify on the scourge of heroin abuse that is devastating, as Senator Feinstein indicated, too many families and communities across America, and in particular in my home state of Kentucky. Thank you for your willingness to focus on this growing threat. I'd like to share with you the story of a wonderful, vibrant community that I have the pleasure of representing here in the U.S. Senate. It could be many places in America, but it happens to be in northern Kentucky. The northern Kentucky area of suburban Cincinnati is a center of culture, arts, and American history. It's the home to the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport and the gateway to the Bluegrass State from the north. Residents of the three counties up there, Kenton, Boone, and Campbell, the area we refer to as Northern Kentucky, live in a time of great opportunity. They have the benefit of living in a major metropolitan area of more than 2 million people, with all the livability and charm of a small town. They can take advantage of the cultural amenities like the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens, Newport on the Levee, the Newport Aquarium, and Kentucky Speedway, to name a few, or they can take in a Cincinnati Reds game or a Cincinnati Bengals NFL game or the Cincinnati Art Museum. And over 25,000 acres of parkland give free rein to relaxation and recreation on a temperate day. Northern Kentucky offers all of that, and yet this proud community is also saddled with the terrible distinction of being the very epicenter of heroin addiction in Kentucky and in the nation. Many believe that the problem started because of prescription pain pill abuse. As Senator Feinstein was pointing out, Kentucky has the third highest drug overdose mortality rate in our country. On the street, these pain pills are expensive. They can cost between $60 and $100, compared to a bag of heroin at just $10 a bag. So given the progress we've made in Kentucky in fighting the illegal sale and use of prescription narcotics, it's no surprise that we've seen an uptick, as Senator Feinstein was just pointing out, in heroin usage once we understand the economics of it. A few months ago, I discussed the relationship between prescription painkiller abuse and growing heroin threat with leaders of federal agencies responsible for curbing these threats, and I'm going to continue to work with them as we all work together to fight this epidemic. I want to highlight for the Drug Caucus some hard but true facts about the extent of heroin abuse in Northern Kentucky, and I'd like to credit the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce for the data. The fact that these numbers come from a Chamber of Commerce and not a law enforcement or public health agency demonstrates how pervasive the threat to the community is. These are the facts. In 2012, there were 61 heroin overdose deaths in the 3 counties referred to as Northern Kentucky. In fact, the number of overdose cases at the region's largest hospital increased by more than 75%. 75% in 2012, while the number of heroin overdose cases by just August of 2013 had already doubled the number in all of 2012. Rates of acute hepatitis C infections in Northern Kentucky are double the statewide rate and 24 times the national rate. 24 times the national rate. Public health officials attribute the region's high infection rate to the region's high level of heroin use. What's more, the Northern Kentucky Health Department has reported that for every 1 death, there is 1 new case of hepatitis C that incurs a lifetime cost of $64,500. The smallest among us are not spared from the scourge. Sadly, newborn babies are born with drug withdrawal syndrome. Each case is heartbreaking and is not only costly in human terms, but fiscally as well, incurring an average hospital cost of $14,257. Law enforcement is on the front lines of this battle to protect Kentucky families. According to the Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, the number of court cases for heroin possession and trafficking has increased by 500% from 2008 to 2012 in the 3 counties that I mentioned, and is expected to double again in 2013. To put this in perspective, the 3 counties of Northern Kentucky area contained 60% of my state's heroin prosecutions in 2011, even though they are home to less than 10% of the state's population. Let me add here that it's fitting you are holding this hearing during National Police Week, when thousands of police officers from across the country visit the nation's capital. We owe these officers our profound thanks and gratitude for risking their lives to combat the drug problem and the many ancillary violent and property crimes driven by the growing trend. Clearly, the troubling facts I've just related show Northern Kentucky has a serious heroin abuse problem. It's a major problem not for a few, but for the entire region. And while northern Kentucky may be ground zero in my state, the problem of heroin abuse is spreading like a cancer across the bluegrass state, where we're losing close to 100 fellow Kentuckians a month, to drug-related deaths. We only have 4 million people in our whole state. This is more lives lost than the fatal car crashes. This March, I held a 90-minute listening session in that area of our state to hear from those closest to the problem how federal resources could best be devoted to fixing it. As I said, in Boone County, one of the 3 counties I referred to, there are great heroes in this tragic story, such as the medical professionals who save lives, the business leaders who raise money for prevention and awareness efforts, the prosecutors and dedicated investigators who take drugs off the streets, and the recovered addicts themselves who find the courage to live despite their addiction. I heard from informed Kentuckians in the medical, public health, and law enforcement fields and the business community. And in particular, I want to point out one brave young man, Patrick Kenyon, who had been ensnared by heroin and saw his friends use it and overdose. It took repeated attempts for him to break his addiction, but he said proudly in the listening session he was 4 years and 10 months clean. I can't stress enough how helpful it was to hear about this issue from so many thoughtful perspectives, and that's why I'm pleased you are holding this hearing today. Let me just report briefly 3 takeaways from the listening session I held several months ago. First, as noted, it's clear that the increase in heroin addiction is tied to our fight against prescription drug abuse, which is largely driven by the abuse of prescription painkillers. Second, while Kentucky is making progress with greater education and more aggressive prosecutions and enhanced regulatory authority at the state level, we need a combination of both treatment and incarceration to be part of the solution. Lastly, the heroin trade is no respecter of borders, which is why multi-jurisdictional and multi-agency law enforcement efforts, such as in my state, the Appalachian High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, or HIDTA, are so crucial. In this area of finite federal resources, we must use these interagency partnerships to the best extent to maximize our return from federal dollars we spend to combat the epidemic. My friend Frank Rapier, the executive director of Appalachian HIDTA, never fails to remind his law enforcement partners that there is no limit to what we can accomplish when no one cares who gets the credit. The very same credo must also guide our efforts at the federal level.
This is the Drug Policy Facts Podcast. I'm your host, Doug McVeigh, editor of drugwarfacts.org. Now for some news from the state of Minnesota. The legislature there last Friday passed a compromise bill that will allow extremely limited access to some cannabis medicines for some patients in extreme need. Minnesota Governor Dayton has said that he would probably sign the bill. However, at the time of this recording, he has not yet done so. The governor has until the end of the month. Regarding the legislation, as explained by the St. Paul Pioneer Press last week, quote, the compromise agreement would let patients with any of 8 medical conditions obtain cannabis in liquid and pill form. Patients would not be able to smoke marijuana, nor would they be allowed to use plant materials and vaporizers. The bill would let patients vaporize liquids. Patients who want to use medical cannabis would need to have their qualifying health condition certified by a doctor, physician's assistant, or advanced practice nurse. After receiving a patient's application, the health department would enroll the patient in a research registry to track the benefits of treatment. End quote. A little fuller explanation comes from the news website Politics in Minnesota, which reported that, quote, under the terms of the original Senate bill, an estimated 38,000 people were expected to become eligible for treatment. Following the removal of qualifying medical conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder and intractable pain, that figure was revised downward to about 5,000. The bill makes the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Health responsible for selecting 2 medical cannabis manufacturers to supply the product. The manufacturers will cultivate and harvest the marijuana at 2 secure indoor sites where it will be refined into pills, oils, and whole plant extracts. The packaged product will then be distributed at a total of 8 locations, also operated by the manufacturers. In a major concession to the law enforcement lobby, the smoking of marijuana, as well as possession of the actual plant, is forbidden. Patients will be allowed to ingest whole plant extract or oil using a vaporizer. In the conference committee, Senator Peterson said the smoking prohibition will likely shrink the pool of potential patients, meaning the estimate of 5,000 patients could be high. That figure was extrapolated from Arizona's medical marijuana program, which, like the other 21 states with medical marijuana laws, permits conventional smoking. In addition to paying a $20,000 application fee, manufacturers will be required to employ a licensed pharmacist to distribute the product. End quote. There is ongoing debate within the drug policy reform community as to whether this highly restrictive law should be counted as what activists refer to as effective. It's even been suggested that a law of this sort might need its own category. The question is becoming, how far do we redefine what's acceptable in order to claim a victory? And finally, an update on an item I've been reporting on over the past few weeks. Open Vape, a cannabis and paraphernalia manufacturer in Denver, Colorado, had instituted a urine testing program for its workers recently. The policy was poorly written and punitive and inspired a great deal of protest from the drug policy reform movement. The company announced that it would rethink and retool its policy. Well, at 2:52 p.m. Pacific time today, I received a copy of that revised policy in my email. I have not yet had time to fully read through it. However, it does appear at first glance that they took on board many of the suggestions I made to company spokesperson Todd Mitchum a while back during a very long phone conversation he and I had back before I first reported the story. It does appear, however, that once we got its attention, OV saw its blunder, and it has done something to improve its policies. They may, as a result, be able to shake off the negative anti-worker image they generated for themselves with that original, poorly written, punitive piss testing policy. It just goes to show that there is no value in staying quiet. And that's a fact that all activists know, yet still we have to continually prove it. If Tom Angel, Pete Geither, myself, and some others hadn't held OV's feet to the fire, nothing would have changed. Drug policy reform wins when employers show respect